I'm Tiffany. I worked full-time before I got married. But the truth is that company had terrible places to work. I had nearly 90 hours of extra work that wasn't paid. Even though I was going to be married, I thought about working, but I quit because of health problems. I now follow a healthy routine and go to bed and wake up at normal times. After I quit, my health got a lot better. My husband, Theo, didn't disagree with my choice to quit. He seems to love that I'm home doing jobs and waiting for him to get home from work. Whenever we were first married, he would say, "I'm so lucky to have a wife who welcomes me home." That thought had become a given after 5 years, which was to be expected. Things still go wrong every so often. When we visit, my mother-in-law, Sarah, who used to be nice, always asks, "When will you give me a grandchild?" She always says it when Theo isn't there. Hearing this over and over again for years has caused me a lot of stress. Honestly, the only reason I have any desire to see her is to avoid her company, as she makes me feel awful. John is my father-in-law. He is quiet, nice, and doesn't get in the way. The strange thing is that Theo says kids are a pain and cost a lot. But when his folks find out, he acts like it doesn't matter to him. I once told him, "If you don't want kids, tell your parents." He laughed it off and said, "Isn't that a conversation for a woman?" When things need to be done right, he avoids duty by sticking to his own ethics. Thus, in the eyes of his mother, I am the wife who is unable to conceive, whereas he prefers the husband who is able to do so. Finally, I tried to be clear by saying, Theo doesn't want kids. But Sarah, who is sure I can't get pregnant, said, "You were just trying to blame someone else." John tells Sarah not to get in the way of our decisions sometimes, but she doesn't listen. Theo finally doesn't want to deal with the stress of being a parent, but he also doesn't want to make his mom mad either. It's clear that he always wants to make his mom happy. I really didn't think he'd be this unstable. He would likely save his mother before me if the ship was sinking. Yes, he's a bit old-fashioned, but at least you're not living with them, my mom says on a call during the week in the afternoon. I've talked to my mom a lot about Theo and Sarah over the past year. My mom is quiet, but she makes sense. She listens slowly and often makes me feel better. At times, I experience guilt due to my belief that a wife ought not to disclose her troubled marriage to her parents. However, my mother is the only one who truly understands this, since Theo is absent. I'm sorry for always talking about this. I know you have your struggles too. It's okay. Mom's fine now. The hospital tests showed nothing wrong. In fact, she just got a pacemaker and had surgery on her heart 3 months ago. I was scared when I learned she was going to have surgery, but she laughed it off. I remember telling my husband about it, and he said, "Pacemakers are pretty common these days. It's not that big of a deal." But when his own mother hurt her ankle, he freaked out and told me he'd help out without being asked first. Talk about having two sets of rules. Putting a bandage on an ankle is not nearly as important as having surgery. I always whine on the phone, and because I live so far away, I don't get to see my family very often. This time, I'm going to surprise my mom on her birthday with a trip with my dad because I haven't been the best daughter to them in the past. I'm home. Dinner's ready. My husband always says as he sits down to eat. No longer does he really say anything about the food, but I was excited about the plan my dad and I made. Actually, my mom's birthday is coming up. "Oh," he said after pausing to eat his steak and taking a puzzled look at me. "I was thinking of booking a hotel in Lake Tahoe and taking a trip there." Really? He didn't seem very interested. The hotel is pretty fancy, and a lot of people like it here. This person helped me a lot. His eyes lit up when he heard the word luxury. A fancy hotel. "We're going to have different rooms from your parents, right?" "Of course we are. They're both going to be there, so why don't we go see some sights in Lake Tahoe together?" "Sure." Oh well, at least he seems interested. Since he spends most of his time with his parents, he shouldn't mind going on trips with mine every once in a while. Lucky for me, my parents are taking care of everything this time, so I don't have to plan the date or the hotel. It's like I let them handle everything. "Where are you going?" "I need to ask for time off." While I was packing in the bedroom, my husband threw the question over his shoulder. Did I not tell you? The 23rd and 24th are the dates. Oh, right. When I turned around, I saw him playing around with his phone without thinking. It's all the gifts for Sarah that were forgotten, among other things. Of course, today had something to do with my choice. Out of the blue, my angry mother-in-law yelled, "A woman like you who doesn't work or even have kids should be thankful just to be married." I didn't feel scared when I realized I could also cut ties with her. Look, don't put me down. Also, just so you know, it was your son who didn't want kids because he thought being a parent would be hard. He probably never said that, though. My wife's mother just sat down shocked. She had always thought it was my fault, but she didn't know that her son had made the choice all along. So my father-in-law took my husband and mother-in-law away, and I went on a family trip with my folks. You had quite the eventful birthday, didn't you? My mom said, "I'm sorry," in her normal happy voice. As long as you are happy, that's all that matters. But I had no idea he was that bad. I should have stopped by earlier to see how things were going. I no longer give a damn about it, as I have been living that way for an extended period of time. It was a wake-up call. My dad was pretty quiet, but there was a hint of happiness on his face. After that, my husband and I got a divorce, but it looks like his relationship with his mom has gotten worse. He was never kind, and I was always in charge of everything except his job. It was said that his room turned into a garbage dump without me there. It looks like my ex-mother-in-law cleans up for him often. But she's about to lose it because she fights a lot with her son, who she used to love. The cops were called because their fight got so bad. My ex-father-in-law says she did this to herself by giving their son too many good things. It's interesting that on the day of the hotel incident, my ex-mother-in-law was friendly with the head of a neighborhood organization. Was also taking a break there. He saw all of her crazy behavior. People in her community no longer value her because she is seen as the mother of the husband who forced his wife to leave him. For myself, I landed a job at the hotel that my uncle owns. He hired me without telling anyone that I'm related to the owner because he was looking for work after his split. I'm now learning from staff members who have more experience. The hotel job takes careful attention. There are still things I haven't learned in times when I've been told I was wrong. But it's a big change from the housework I used to do that no one noticed. Everything that is done here is praised. He looked truly angry. After I get married, my parents should usually come first. Tell your parents to go home. What? That's correct. From now on, it's just the two of us and our son, my mother-in-law said without missing a beat. I was really hurt. I never thought he would be this way. Where did my kind husband go after we got married? Then a big man in a suit quickly came up to us. Is there a problem? My mother-in-law started talking very quickly before he could finish. Get rid of these people. We'll use their last few nights. I'm sorry, but we can't do that. She snapped. Why not? They have already paid, and we have them booked until the day after tomorrow. She glared at me in anger. She is married to my son. What my son's wife and her parents own is pretty much ours. Just a nod from my husband. Every feeling I had at that moment just blew up when I saw that scene. The man said he was sorry, but they couldn't do that. She told him, first of all, you're letting such ugly people stay here. Will it make the hotel look bad? My husband started to blame me. I chose to go behind my husband's back and tell him the truth. You know, this place is my father's family home. My husband and mother-in-law looked at me with wide eyes. The man in the suit is my father's younger brother, which means he is my uncle. My uncle began to talk in a strong but humble way. I'm a lot younger than my brother. People in our family were busy with their hotel business at the time. He looked after me like a parent. He gave me everything I have now. When my dad heard this, he got upset and said, "You." I was so happy when I heard you were staying here because I thought I could finally repay his kindness. You think you can stay for free because it's the family of your son's wife. I could hear my wife's mother groaning. We have rooms that cost between 450 and 1,800 rupees per night. If you're interested, Please go to the front desk. Keep the price the same. Both my husband and his mother were shocked. What should we do? There's no other hotel that we know of. What do you think I'll say? My father-in-law let out a deep sigh as he watched them. This is karma for always taking credit for Tiffany's achievements and trying to impress your mother with them. My husband didn't seem to know what to say. I'm really sorry, everyone. He began to say, I never thought my son would do something like this. No, wait, John, I said right away. I also feel sorry for my father-in-law. His son asked him to go to the hotel, but he found out he had been. My mother-in-law seemed to have learned even more, but all of a sudden she got it. Wait, can't you give us a discount since it's a family-run hotel? After all, we're family. How can she have no shame? Has she forgotten everything she did? But my uncle said in a cool voice, I don't think of someone as family who insults my loved ones. What he said made me understand something. It was rude of my husband and mother-in-law to treat me that way all along. I was given all the hard jobs to do. They took any praise they could get. What did I do for them? They took advantage of me and put me down. There would have been no trip if they had even a little thought about my family. You've always looked down on me, haven't you? I looked at my husband, who hung his head and didn't say anything. You thought that if you pushed hard enough, my parents would let this go. That's awful. I didn't have the money to stay at that fancy hotel. I just wanted to make people like me. He glared at me with sadness in his face. My husband's father came up to me and looked upset. Doesn't this sound like you? Who are you trying to protect the most right now, huh? Your mother, who you always want to look good in front of. My husband stood still and had a serious look on his face. Listen, you are married, my father-in-law said next. Protecting your wife should be your top concern, not making your mom proud. Still, even though my husband turned away, I saw the look on his face. No matter what, he will always pick his mother. I got up the courage to speak out. John, thanks for everything you've done for me so far. You've helped me more than he ever did. He and I used to live together, but I can't do it anymore. My husband was shocked and looked up. Let's get a divorce. It made me feel so free to say the word divorce out loud. Right, I've always wanted to divorce him. Are you serious? From behind, I could hear my mom's voice. I said yes. Yes, I've been thinking about it for a while now. My husband quickly said, Hold on, I'll say sorry for what happened this time. It's not just about this time. He doesn't really pay attention to me or my family, so I've told him about this trip before. But when he thought about it, his lack of response was better than his previous emotions. We drove to the fancy hotel in Lake Tahoe on the day of the trip. My parents had come the night before. We were going to explore Lake Tahoe with them today and have dinner at the hotel. They haven't been seen in a while. Maybe since my mom had surgery. The two of them are retired and don't normally blow up, so this trip should be fun. I read a Lake Tahoe vacation magazine while sitting in the passenger seat. After I checked in, I was going to call my parents to the office, but they were already in the parking lot, and Sarah was standing next to them. My husband quickly pulled over, parked the car, and ran over to them. What the heck is going on? I was sure that I had explained the plan well. It didn't take me long to get out of the passenger seat and follow. What's going on there? While I was upset, my husband started talking to my parents in a smooth way. You knew about a great hotel, right? From tomorrow on, we're going to enjoy it with my parents. You paid for the stay already, right? Both of my parents were shocked. Of course they would be. This wasn't even supposed to happen. As bold as ever, my mother-in-law said, You know a lot of good hotels. Take care of it for us, okay? Let's go to Alaska next time. What are you saying? My father-in-law, on the other hand, asked my husband, Didn't you invite us on this trip? He seemed to have the same lack of knowledge as we did. You said you pay for it. I could feel my blood rush to my head when I heard that. Wait a second. My parents booked this hotel for us. Why do you just stare you ready to invite yours? What's the big deal? Asked my mother-in-law. You can't keep this nice hotel all to yourself. You should care more about the parents of your husband. Because I don't get to see my parents as often as John and Sarah. I wanted to take them on a fancy trip. Also, my mom's birthday is today. With a really serious look, my mother-in-law looked at me from head to toe. You've never given me a present for my birthday. Such clear favoritism? You did send Sarah her favorite flowers recently, didn't you? That came from your son. Don't take credit for what other people do. When I looked at my husband, he tried to avoid my eyes. While we were married, I chose and gave all of the gifts. He never seemed interested in doing it. So you kept silent about the gift for Sarah. He said something terrible when he looked into my husband's eyes. I'm going to buy them with your money. It's the same as if I had chosen and bought them myself.
After 16 years of marriage, my selfish husband dumped me via email. I'm leaving you, old lady, for a 25-year-old. Moving to another state and draining your bank account. I laughed, replied good luck, and waited. Minutes later, his world started crumbling, and he never saw it coming. I never imagined that my life would take such a drastic turn on what seemed like an ordinary afternoon. I was at my bakery, Sweet Haven, in Seattle, carefully assembling an intricate 5-tier wedding cake for a client. The scent of freshly baked pastries filled the air, and the quiet hum of my employees moving in the background gave me a sense of accomplishment. This bakery was more than a business. It was my dream, one I had nurtured for years. Then my phone chimed. A new email notification from Daniel Reed, my husband of 16 years. I wiped my hands on my apron, expecting some routine message about the house or bills. But when I opened it, my heart didn't pound. My breath didn't hitch. I had been preparing for this moment. Samantha, I'm leaving you. Jade and I are moving to Los Angeles tomorrow. I've emptied our joint account, so don't bother trying anything stupid. This should be easy for you, considering how much you love that little bakery of yours. Good luck. There was no apology, no regret. Just cold detachment. I read it twice, then a third time. And instead of breaking down, as Daniel had likely imagined, I simply exhaled and set my phone down. It was done. For nearly a year, I had seen the warning signs. His late nights at the gym, his sudden obsession with self-improvement, and his secretive phone habits. I wasn't blind, just patient. For months ago, after finding a $500 charge for a luxury hotel, I knew I had all the proof I needed. He had claimed he was working late that night. Instead of confronting him, I did something better. I opened a separate bank account, one he didn't know about. I transferred every penny I had earned from my bakery and let the joint account appear normal, just enough to keep him from getting suspicious. I had also hired a private investigator. I didn't want just suspicions, I wanted evidence. And I got it. Photos, receipts, text logs, enough to tear down every single lie he had ever told me. And now here he was thinking he had won. As if his betrayal wasn't enough, a second email arrived minutes later. By the way, I'll be sending movers to pick up my things next week. I know you'll be heartbroken, but let's be mature about this. Jade and I deserve to be happy. I almost laughed. He thought I'd beg? I glanced at the clock. 4 p.m. I finished decorating the wedding cake, ensuring each delicate sugar flower was perfectly placed. When my client arrived at 5 p.m., I smiled warmly, chatted about their big day, and handed them a cake that would be remembered for years. Daniel thought he had broken me, but I was still standing. As soon as I locked up the bakery for the day, I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I had saved under Plan B. It's time, I said simply. My lawyer, Rachel, had been waiting for this call. I'll file everything first thing in the morning, she replied. You're going to love what we've prepared. Oh, I already did. Daniel thought he had taken everything from me, but he had no idea I had outmaneuvered him months ago. That night, I poured myself a glass of Cabernet Sauvignon, the expensive kind I had been saving for a special occasion. This counted. By the next morning, the chaos had begun. At exactly 7:30 a.m., my phone buzzed with one missed call after another. Daniel. Then another name popped up, his mother, Margaret Reed. I let the calls go unanswered and checked my emails instead. A flurry of furious messages from Daniel filled my inbox. What the hell did you do? The airline says our tickets were canceled. Jade and I can't check into the hotel. Our reservation disappeared. Call me. Now. I smirked. Oh, Daniel. You should have read the fine print. I had reported his fraudulent charges to the credit card company, who immediately canceled the bookings. No flight, no five-star hotel. By the time Daniel finally got through, his voice was shaking with rage. You vindictive little. What did you do to our money? I let the silence stretch before answering, my voice calm. What money, Daniel? There was a pause. Then his fury erupted. You stole from me. No, I corrected. I protected myself. You stole from us. His mother, Margaret, called moments later. This time, I answered. Samantha, Daniel told me everything, she began, her tone sharp. You're being unreasonable. I didn't say anything. I simply forwarded Daniel's email, the one where he had bragged about draining our shared account and leaving me. There was dead silence on the other end. Then Margaret muttered, I didn't know he actually admitted it. I think we're done here, Margaret, I said before hanging up. At 8 a.m., I received another call. Rachel, the emergency hearing is set for next Monday. We have more than enough evidence to freeze all shared assets. Perfect, I replied. Let's make sure he can't touch another cent. As I ended the call, I stepped out onto the sidewalk, the crisp morning air filling my lungs. Across the street, customers were already lining up outside my bakery. I smiled, unlocking the door. Daniel thought he had ended my story. He had only just given me a new beginning. The first real blow landed on Daniel just 24 hours after his grand exit. That morning, I was in the bakery kneading dough for a fresh batch of croissants when my phone vibrated on the counter. Another email from Daniel. This time, the tone was different. Samantha, stop playing games. You had no right to touch our finances. I'll take you to court if I have to. I don't want to get ugly, but you're forcing my hand. I smiled. He had no idea that I had already forced his hand. By the time he had typed out his threats, my lawyer had already frozen all shared assets under a legal injunction. Daniel couldn't withdraw a single dollar more. A few minutes later, another email arrived. This time, it wasn't from Daniel, it was from my private investigator. Confirmed. Daniel's credit cards have been maxed out for months. His bank account is nearly empty. He's made several failed attempts to apply for new credit. Also, Jade's social media posts indicate frustration. She expected a luxury lifestyle and is currently staying in a budget motel. More updates to come. I took a slow sip of my morning coffee. Daniel was officially drowning, and I was about to watch him sink. By Monday morning, I was sitting in court, wearing my best navy blue suit, ready to finalize Daniel's downfall. He arrived 15 minutes late, looking disheveled and exhausted. His expensive blazer was missing, replaced by an old jacket that didn't fit quite right. Jade was nowhere to be seen. I had a feeling she had already realized her mistake. His lawyer, a man who clearly hadn't had enough time to prepare, stood and tried to argue that Daniel had a right to half of my bakery. Your Honor, my client contributed to this business financially and emotionally. It was a shared marital asset. My lawyer, Rachel, didn't even blink. Your Honor, we have full documentation that the bakery was founded entirely by my client, without any investment from Mr. Reed. Furthermore, we have financial records showing that Mr. Reed referred to the bakery as a hobby and discouraged my client from expanding it. Rachel tapped a thick file of evidence. Receipts, tax filings, business contracts, all under my name alone. The judge turned to Daniel. Do you have any documented proof that you financially contributed to the bakery, Mr. Reed? Daniel shifted uncomfortably. I mean, I supported her. Emotionally. I was there. The judge raised an eyebrow. Emotional support is not financial contribution. Your claim is denied. And just like that, Daniel lost his last hope of taking anything from me. But the final humiliation was yet to come. Rachel stood again. Your Honor, my client has also provided evidence of Mr. Reed admitting, in writing, to draining their shared bank account, an action that constitutes financial misconduct under Washington state law. She handed over printouts of Daniel's emails, The ones where he had mocked me for emptying our account and bragged about moving to Los Angeles. The judge scanned the pages. "Mr. Reed, do you deny these statements?" Daniel's lawyer shifted nervously, but said nothing. The judge sighed. "Due to clear evidence of financial misconduct, all remaining shared assets will remain frozen. Additionally, Mr. Reed is ordered to return the withdrawn funds within 48 hours. Daniel shot up in his seat. "That money is gone. You can't just demand I magically replace it." The judge's face remained impassive. "Then I suggest you find a way, Mr. Reed." "That is not my concern." I glanced at Daniel just as realization dawned on his face. He was broke. His plan had failed. He had nothing. And I had won. By the time the hearing ended, Daniel had lost everything he had schemed for. His mother, Margaret, had been in the courtroom the entire time and had watched the entire disaster unfold. I expected another phone call from her, but none came. Maybe, just maybe, she was finally realizing what kind of son she had raised. But Daniel? He wasn't done. That evening, my phone buzzed with another email from him. "You think you're so smart? You won't get rid of me that easily. I have copies of all your bakery records. I can prove I was part of it. We're not done." I smirked and forwarded his email to Rachel. Her response came minutes later. "Good. More evidence of his desperation and false claims. He's making this too easy." Daniel had always underestimated me. He thought I was fragile, dependent on him. But now he was the one with nothing left. I didn't have to dig for information. Jade was making her complaints public. The once proud, flashy 22-year-old who had thought she was trading up for a glamorous life was now posting vague, bitter Instagram stories about betrayal and bad decisions. Be careful who you trust. Some people only pretend to be successful. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. She had made her choice. And now, like Daniel, she was living the consequences. Meanwhile, I had bigger things to focus on. The bakery was thriving. Customers had started showing up in larger numbers, many of them whispering about my legendary divorce. Some even bought extra pastries just to support me. My ex did something similar, a woman confided while paying for a dozen cupcakes. Thought he could leave and take everything. Men like that never expect us to be smarter than them. She winked before leaving. She was right. Daniel never saw me coming. And I was just getting started. Daniel's desperation only grew after the court ruling. He had lost access to my bakery. The money he had stolen was now a legal matter, and his grand escape to Los Angeles had turned into a complete disaster. I knew he wasn't the kind of man to admit defeat. He would try to twist the situation, rewrite history in a way that made him the victim. And that's exactly what he did. The first sign of his unraveling came in the form of a message from a mutual friend, Lisa. She owned a coffee shop a few blocks from my bakery and had always been friendly with both of us. She texted me late one evening. "You won't believe what Daniel is saying about you," she wrote. "He's telling people you tricked him, that you had this planned all along." I couldn't help but laugh. Of course, he was trying to make himself look like the poor, blindsided husband. He wasn't just a cheater and a thief. He was a liar who had never been able to accept responsibility for his own choices. Over the next few days, I heard similar stories from other acquaintances. Daniel had started reaching out to people, spinning a pathetic tale about how I had trapped him in a loveless marriage and then set him up to fail. He left out the part where he had been sneaking around with a 22-year-old and emptying our bank account. But the most pathetic part was how he still thought people would believe him. I didn't bother defending myself. The truth had already spoken for itself. The court had ruled in my favor. The evidence was undeniable. And, besides, I had more important things to focus on. The bakery was thriving. Business was better than ever, and whether people admitted it or not, they loved a story of resilience. Customers came in, not just for pastries and cakes, but to support me. Some were women who had been through similar betrayals. Others were just impressed that I had stood my ground and come out stronger. Every day, I saw new faces, people who wanted to shake my hand and tell me that I inspired them. It was strange at first, but eventually I embraced it. Meanwhile, Daniel's situation kept getting worse. The last time I had seen him in court, he still had that smug confidence, the kind that suggested he thought he could turn everything around. But now, reality had caught up with him. Jade had left him. That part didn't surprise me at all. One of Daniel's former coworkers, Brandon, stopped by the bakery one evening. He had always been polite to me in the past, but I never expected him to come in and give me updates about my ex-husband. "I just thought you should know," Brandon said as he sipped his coffee. Jade dumped him. She kicked him out of her apartment a few weeks ago. Apparently, she finally realized he wasn't the rich, powerful guy he made himself out to be. I raised an eyebrow. "And how do you know this?" "She's been complaining about him to everyone," Brandon said with a smirk. "Said he was bitter, always blaming you for everything, and that he actually expected her to support him financially. She called him dead weight and said she made the biggest mistake of her life." I couldn't help but chuckle. Jade had thought she was getting some fantasy version of Daniel, a successful, exciting older man. But in reality, she had ended up with a broke, bitter mess who had lost everything in a failed scheme. I didn't feel sorry for her. She had helped destroy my marriage. She had made her choice. But at least she had learned her lesson quickly. Daniel, on the other hand, had learned nothing. His mother, Margaret, called me for the first time in months. I debated whether to answer, but curiosity got the best of me. "Samantha," she said, her voice softer than I remembered. "I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I don't know what to do with him. He's still blaming you for everything. He's angry all the time. He won't accept that this is his fault." I didn't respond. What was there to say? "He's still living here," she continued, almost as if she was embarrassed. "He lost his job. The company found out about his relationship with Jade, and they let him go. It was a violation of company policy, apparently." That part surprised me. I hadn't expected him to lose his job entirely. I thought maybe he'd be demoted, maybe passed over for promotions, but fired? That was worse than I expected. "He's trying to fight it," Margaret said. "Says it was unfair. He even tried to claim age discrimination. But they're not budging." I sighed, shaking my head. "I don't know what you want me to say, Margaret." She hesitated. "I guess. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I should have believed you from the beginning. It wasn't much, but it was something." After we hung up, I sat at my desk in the back of the bakery, staring at the framed screenshot I had kept. It was the last email Daniel had sent before I blocked him. "Enjoy your little bakery. At least it'll keep you busy in your old age." I had left it there as a reminder, but as I looked at it now, I realized something. I didn't need the reminder anymore. I had moved on. I had built something stronger, something permanent. Daniel had tried to reduce me to nothing, but in the end, he had only destroyed himself. The next morning, I removed the framed email from my wall and threw it in the trash. Years passed, and life kept moving forward. My bakery expanded to new locations, each one thriving more than the last. What started as a single shop had grown into something much bigger, a business that not only provided for me but also for the employees who had become like family. My story had been picked up by a few local business magazines, but not as the woman scorned by a cheating husband. No, I was recognized as a savvy entrepreneur, a smart businesswoman who had built something lasting despite life trying to knock me down. I had long since stopped thinking about Daniel, but every now and then, news of him found its way to me. Through mutual acquaintances, I learned that he had finally moved out of his mother's house, though not into anything impressive. He had rented a small apartment above a garage in a not-so-great part of town. His finances were still a mess. After losing his job, he had struggled to find stable work. His attempt to sue his former company for wrongful termination had failed spectacularly, leaving him with nothing but legal fees he couldn't afford to pay. He had also tried to revive his dating life, but that didn't go well either. Women his age weren't interested in a bitter, middle-aged man still talking about his glory days, and younger women weren't fooled by his outdated attempts at charm. Jade had apparently warned her friends about him, even sharing old messages where he had desperately tried to win her back after she left. I wasn't surprised. He had thrown everything away, and for what? A fantasy that didn't even last a year? He had underestimated me, convinced himself I would crumble without him. But the truth was, I had never needed him. One afternoon, as I was preparing for the grand opening of my 5th bakery, something unexpected happened. Jade walked in. I recognized her immediately, though she looked different, less confident, less sure of herself. There was no designer handbag on her arm this time, no flashy jewelry. She stood by the counter, hesitating for a moment before finally approaching me. "I owe you an apology," she said, her voice softer than I had ever heard it before. I didn't say anything, just waited. "I believed everything he told me," she continued. "He said you were controlling, that you didn't support him, that he felt trapped with you. But then he did the same thing to me. The lies, the manipulation, the excuses. And when things didn't go his way, he blamed everyone but himself." I nodded, as if I had heard this story before, because I had. "I thought he had big dreams," she admitted. "I thought I was part of something exciting. But he never actually wanted to build anything. He just wanted to run away from responsibility. That I understood more than anything." She sighed. "When you froze the accounts, he thought he could live off me, just for a little while, until he figured things out. But 2 weeks in, he was already complaining about my apartment, telling me I should take out a loan for a bigger place. That's when I realized he never had a plan. He just wanted someone else to carry him." I almost laughed at how predictable Daniel had been. "I guess I just wanted to say," Jade added, "you didn't deserve what he did to you." For the first time since she had walked in, I truly looked at her. She had been young, naive, blinded by the fantasy Daniel had sold her. And now, she had learned the same lesson I had, but in a much shorter time. He was always chasing an escape, I told her. I was too busy building a reality. She gave a sad smile, nodded, and left. That was the last time I ever saw her. By the time the bakery's grand opening arrived, I was no longer the woman Daniel had walked away from. I was standing in the middle of a thriving business, surrounded by employees and customers who believed in me. I had built this with my own 2 hands, with my intelligence, with my patience. This was mine. A few weeks later, I got one last update about Daniel, though it came in a way I never expected. Margaret showed up at one of my bakeries unannounced. She looked put together, dressed in one of the designer dresses she had bought from my store years ago. I hadn't spoken to her since the divorce. She ordered a coffee, sat down at a corner table, and after a few minutes, motioned for me to join her. "I saw Daniel the other day," she said, stirring her drink slowly. "He's still talking about his glory days, still telling people he was blindsided by the divorce. But he doesn't understand. He didn't lose everything in the divorce. He threw it away." I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. She took a deep breath, setting her spoon down. "I just wanted to tell you you were right. About everything. And I'm sorry I ever doubted you." I gave her a small nod, and that was it. I never heard about Daniel again. I never looked him up. Never wondered where he ended up. He was nothing more than a footnote in my story. And as I stood in my office that evening, looking at the framed quote hanging on my wall, the one that read, "Success is the best revenge," I knew, without a doubt, that I had won. Not by destroying him. Not by getting even. I won because I built something real. Because I never let him take away what mattered most. Because I had always been stronger than he ever realized. And that was all the closure I needed. My own sister destroyed my life. She poisoned our grandfather, framed me, and stole our $150 million inheritance. I was sent to prison for a crime I didn't commit. But when I got out, she never saw it coming. I never imagined that my life, carefully built with discipline and hard work, could crumble so quickly. But when your own family turns against you, when those closest to you betray you for money, you realize how fragile everything truly is. My name is Nancy Reynolds. I'm 34 years old, and I've spent my life earning everything I have. While my family has always lived under the shadow of wealth, dependent on my grandfather's fortune, I chose to take a different path. I worked my way through college, landed a job in finance, and climbed my way up to become a senior finance executive in Seattle. I never relied on anyone, never expected handouts, and most importantly, I never lived a life of illusion. Unlike me, my older sister, Sophia, was the opposite. She was once a TV news anchor, but when that career faded, she reinvented herself as a socialite in Los Angeles. To the world, she was elegant, charming, always perfectly dressed, always attending exclusive parties. But I knew the truth. Her entire lifestyle was paid for by our grandfather, William Reynolds. Without his money, she was nothing. Our parents, Daniel and Margaret, were no different. They had settled in Los Angeles, living a comfortable life in a luxury estate, but not because of their own success. Everything, from their home to their cars, even their extravagant vacations, was funded by my grandfather. They acted as if they had built their own wealth, but in reality, they were nothing more than well-dressed dependents, pretending to be something they weren't. And then there was grandfather William Reynolds, the man who built everything. He had started as a struggling real estate developer and turned himself into one of the most successful businessmen in the country. His fortune was vast, his properties stretched across multiple states, and yet, despite his wealth, he always valued one thing above all: independence. Earn your own way, he used to tell me, because the moment you rely on others, they own you. I had always lived by those words. But my sister, my parents, they never listened. That's why I knew Thanksgiving was always a game. Every year, my family gathered at the Monarch Hotel, a 5-star resort in Los Angeles, for a lavish, expensive celebration, all paid for by grandfather. It was a tradition, but for my parents and sister, it was more than that. It was an opportunity to impress, to pretend they were something greater than they really were. I arrived at the hotel on Thanksgiving morning, exhausted from my flight, but mentally prepared. I always hated these gatherings, but I attended for grandfather. He was the only one in my family who truly understood me, the only one who ever encouraged me to be independent. I checked in, placed my suitcase in the suite, and freshened up before heading downstairs. As I walked through the grand lobby, I spotted my parents sitting by the bar, talking in hushed voices. My mother's face lit up when she saw me, but my father barely looked at me. He had always favored Sophia, and that had never changed. Then, Sophia appeared. She was dressed in designer heels, carrying an expensive handbag, and wearing a diamond necklace that I knew she hadn't paid for herself. She walked toward me with a smug expression, as if she had already won some unspoken competition. "Nancy," she said, her voice smooth and practiced. "You made it." "Of course I did," I replied. "Where's grandfather?" Sophia's smile faltered. "He's resting," she said after a pause. A strange feeling crept into my chest. Something was off. As dinner approached, I started to worry. Grandfather always arrived early to these events, always eager to see me, always full of life. But as the night stretched on, he never showed up. Then, just as the servers were preparing dessert, a hotel staff member approached the table and whispered something to my father. My mother gasped. My father's face turned pale. And then I knew. Something terrible had happened. The next thing I heard was a single sentence that sent a chill through my bones. "Your grandfather has passed away." The room spun. My heart pounded. The words didn't make sense. "He was fine yesterday," I whispered. I spoke to him, but no one met my gaze. Sophia dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, but there were no real tears. My mother, usually dramatic about the smallest inconvenience, was eerily composed. My father sighed and rubbed his temple, as if this were nothing more than an unfortunate event to be managed. I couldn't think. I couldn't breathe. Grandfather was gone, and yet no one seemed truly shocked. The funeral was held 2 days later, a grand affair with important guests and carefully arranged tributes. But through all the eulogies, the condolences, and the empty words, something gnawed at me. Something wasn't right. And then came the will reading. I sat in the law office, still numb from grief, waiting to hear my grandfather's final wishes. His lawyer, a man who had worked with him for decades, adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. As per Mr. William Reynolds' final will, the majority of his estate, his businesses, his financial assets, and his properties will be inherited by... He looked up directly at me. Nancy Reynolds. A stunned silence filled the room. My mother's lips parted, but no words came out. My father turned red, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair. And then there was Sophia. Her expression, for the first time, was stripped of all pretense. She was furious. I was meant to inherit everything. Not her. Not my parents.
Me.
Before I could even process the weight of those words, Sophia spoke, her voice sharp, cutting through the silence like a blade. This doesn't make sense, she snapped. Grandfather never said anything about this. But the lawyer simply folded his hands and continued. The will was updated a month ago. Mr. Reynolds believed that Nancy was the only one in the family who shared his values, the only one capable of running his empire responsibly. Sophia's hands clenched into fists. My mother reached for her pearls as if clutching them would make reality change. My father stared at me with pure resentment. And then I realized something. My grandfather had always been healthy. His mind had always been sharp. His death had come out of nowhere. And now, after his passing, Sophia was the one acting as if something had been stolen from her. That's when I knew. Grandfather's death was no accident. The moment I walked out of that office, I knew I had to find the truth. My grandfather had always been a strong, sharp-minded man. He was careful with his health, cautious with his business, and above all, he never trusted blindly. There was no reason for him to suddenly collapse and die, unless someone had helped make it happen. And there was only one person who had everything to gain from his death. Sophia. I didn't say anything at first. I let them think I was still in shock, still trying to process the news. But inside, I was burning. As we left the law office, Sophia walked beside me, her arms crossed, her mouth set in a tight line. I could feel her watching me, waiting for a reaction. "This changes nothing," she finally said, her voice low and controlled. I stopped walking and turned to face her. "It changes everything." Her lips curled into a cold smile. "You think you're in control now, Nancy? That this money, this power, actually belongs to you?" She leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "You have no idea what you've just stepped into." I held my ground. "Neither do you." I didn't need to hear anything else. I already knew she was guilty. The problem was proving it. Over the next few days, I started digging. I made calls to my grandfather's doctors, looking for anything suspicious. The medical report listed natural causes, but that meant nothing. If someone had tampered with his medication or slipped something into his food, it wouldn't necessarily show up without deeper testing. And that's when I found my first crack in the story. My grandfather's private nurse, someone who had worked for him for years, had suddenly quit 2 days before he died. That wasn't a coincidence. I tracked her down, called her, and asked to meet. At first, she refused.
Said she didn't want to get involved.
"Please," I told her, my voice barely steady. "I just want to know what really happened." She hesitated, then whispered, "He wasn't supposed to die that night." My blood ran cold. "I can't say more," she added. "But check his medication. And be careful. People like your sister, they don't like loose ends." I hung up, my hand shaking. I didn't know what scared me more, the confirmation that my grandfather had been murdered, or the fact that whoever did it was still watching. That night, I went to my grandfather's estate, searching through his things, looking for anything that felt out of place. And then, in the bottom drawer of his desk, I found it, a bottle of heart medication that he had never taken before. I knew my grandfather's prescriptions. He had always been meticulous about his health. This bottle wasn't his. Someone had replaced his real medication with something else. I stared at the bottle, my breath coming fast. This was the proof I needed. If I could get it tested, I could find out what was inside. I could expose Sophia for what she was. But I never got the chance. The next morning, I woke up to loud banging on my hotel room door. Before I could even process what was happening, the police were inside, surrounding me, pulling me out of bed. "Nancy Reynolds, you're under arrest for financial fraud and embezzlement." Everything blurred. My heart pounded, so hard I thought I might pass out. "What?" "No, this is a mistake." I tried to resist, tried to explain, but the officers weren't listening. And then I saw her. Sophia. standing just outside the hotel room, her arms crossed, watching as the police handcuffed me. She smiled. She had set me up. The next few days were a nightmare. I was dragged into an interrogation room, forced to listen as the investigators listed off evidence of my so-called crimes, forged financial documents, missing money from my grandfather's estate, accounts in my name that I had never seen before. It was all fake. I knew it. But Sophia had planned this too well. And my parents? They didn't defend me. They didn't even hesitate. When they were called in for questioning, my father sat down, folded his hands, and said coldly, "We always knew Nancy had a selfish streak." My mother nodded. Sophia has always been the responsible one. It makes sense that grandfather would trust her with everything. I wanted to scream,
To cry.
but I refused to give them that satisfaction. The trial was swift. The judge denied bail. I was convicted. And just like that, I lost everything.
My job.
My reputation. My freedom. The day they took me to the maximum security prison, I sat in the transport van, staring out the window, watching my life disappear behind me. But as I felt the cold weight of those prison walls close around me, something inside me hardened. They thought they had won. They thought they had buried me. But they underestimated me. I had lost the battle. But the war? The war was just beginning. Prison strips you of everything. Your identity, your dignity, your sense of time. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that prison doesn't break everyone. Some of us find a way to survive. And in my case, I wasn't just going to survive, I was going to fight back. The first few weeks were the hardest. The moment I walked through those gates, I could feel the weight of the stairs. Some of the other inmates saw me as fresh meat, someone easy to break. But they didn't know me. They didn't know that I had already been broken the day my own family turned on me. And when you've already lost everything, there's nothing left to fear. I kept my head down, observed, and waited. I needed a way out, not just out of prison, but out of this nightmare Sophia had created for me. I had been set up, betrayed, and buried alive, but I wasn't going to stay buried. It started with small conversations. In a place like this, you learn quickly that power doesn't just come from strength, it comes from information. I listened, made connections, and slowly began piecing together a way to clear my name. And that's how I met Detective Mark Collins. Collins had been investigating my grandfather's death before I was even arrested. He had suspected something wasn't right about how suddenly William Reynolds had passed, but before he could dig deeper, the case was shut down.
I knew why.
Sophia had made sure of it. One afternoon, Collins came to see me. He sat across the metal table, flipping through a folder, his face unreadable. Then he slid something toward me, a photo of the prescription bottle I had found in my grandfather's office. "You are onto something," he said. I stared at him, my pulse racing. "What do you mean?" "We had the pills tested. They contained traces of digoxin poisoning. In small doses, it causes heart failure. Looks like someone had been slipping it into your grandfather's medication over time." I gripped the edge of the table. There it was. The proof. But Collins wasn't finished. I also found something else. He reached into his bag and pulled out bank records, Sophia's bank records. There was a large transfer made a week before William Reynolds' death, $500,000 deposited into an offshore account under the name of your grandfather's private nurse. My breath caught. Sophia had paid her off. "She disappeared right after your arrest," Collins continued. "But we've tracked her to Mexico. If I can get her to testify, we can open the case again." I exhaled slowly, my mind spinning. This was it. This was my way back. Collins looked at me seriously. "I believe you, Nancy. But I need time. Stay out of trouble." Trouble found me first. That night, someone slipped a note under my cell door. No name, no handwriting. Just 3 words. "Stop digging. Now." I wasn't stupid. I knew exactly who had sent it. Sophia may have gotten me locked up, but she wasn't done with me yet. She was watching, waiting, making sure I never made it out of here. She had underestimated me. Over the next few months, I worked with Collins and my lawyer, Adam Foster, gathering every single piece of evidence we could find. We found witnesses, a housekeeper who had seen Sophia tampering with my grandfather's drinks, an accountant who noticed money missing from his estate before his death. And finally, Collins did the impossible. He tracked down the nurse. And she was ready to talk. With all the evidence in place, Foster filed for an appeal. The hearing was scheduled, but Sophia had one last move to make. 2 nights before my court date, I was attacked in my cell. It happened fast. A woman I didn't know cornered me, shoving me hard against the wall. "You don't know when to quit," she hissed, pulling a sharpened piece of metal from her sleeve. "Sophia says you should stay put." I acted before she could strike. I twisted, slamming my elbow into her ribs, knocking the weapon from her hands. Guards rushed in, and within seconds, she was dragged away, screaming. I sat on the floor, my chest heaving. Sophia had just made her last mistake. 2 days later, I was standing in court again, but this time, I wasn't the one on trial. Foster laid out everything: the poison, the bribes, the missing money, the testimony from the nurse. Collins presented the forensic evidence, and when it was Sophia's turn to speak, she cracked. She tried to deny it, tried to twist the truth, to paint herself as the victim. But the evidence was overwhelming. Everyone in that courtroom saw her for what she was. And then, the judge gave his ruling. "Nancy Reynolds, all charges against you are dropped. You are free to go." I had won. But this wasn't over. Not yet. Sophia had stolen everything from me. My name, my life, my freedom. Now it was time to take everything from her. Walking out of that courtroom, feeling the cold air hit my skin, I should have felt free. But I didn't.
Not yet.
Freedom wasn't just about walking out of prison, it was about taking back what was stolen. And Sophia had stolen everything. My name, my life, my future. Now it was my turn. The reporters were everywhere, cameras flashing, microphones being shoved in my face. "Nancy, how do you feel about your release? What will you do now? Do you plan to press charges against your sister?" I ignored them. I had only one destination in mind: the estate my grandfather left me, the home Sophia had stolen. When I arrived, I wasn't surprised to find her there, sitting in the grand living room, swirling a glass of wine like she still owned the place. She didn't look surprised to see me either. "Well," she sighed, setting down her glass. "I was wondering when you'd show up." I took a slow step forward, my hands in my pockets. "This house isn't yours, Sophia." She smirked, but there was something off about it. She was scared. "Legally, no," she admitted. "But does that really matter? You think you can just step back into the life I built?" She laughed, but it was forced. People like me always land on their feet. I stared at her. "Is that what you think? That you're going to get away with this?" She crossed her arms. "I already have." I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen. A second later, a newscaster's voice filled the room. "Breaking news. A financial investigation into Sophia Reynolds has uncovered massive fraud and theft from the William Reynolds estate. Prosecutors are now preparing formal charges, with potential sentences ranging up to 25 years in prison." Sophia's face drained of color. I kept going. "Oh, and it gets better. Turns out grandfather left a clause in his will. Anyone convicted of a felony forfeits their inheritance." I smiled, tilting my head. "That means everything. The house, the money, the investments. Gone." She shot up from her seat. "You're lying." I stepped forward. "Check the news." I made sure every reporter in the city got the files. Sophia grabbed her phone, scrolling with shaking fingers. And then, as the reality sank in, her entire body sagged. You ruined me," she whispered. I exhaled sharply, shaking my head.
No, Sophia.
"You ruined yourself." Her eyes darted around the room, desperate. "Nancy, please. You don't understand what it's like. I had no choice." I laughed, cold and sharp. "No choice. You killed grandfather. You framed me. You had me thrown in prison like I was trash." I stepped even closer, lowering my voice. "You tried to have me killed in there." She flinched. "You had a choice, I continued. And you chose greed. You chose yourself. Tears welled up in her eyes.
Please, Nancy.
Don't let them take me to prison. I can fix this. But I was already walking away. Behind me, I heard her sobbing, begging, her voice breaking apart. I never looked back. The next morning, Sophia was arrested outside that same house, her hands cuffed behind her back as reporters swarmed her. I watched from my office in Seattle, sipping my coffee. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. My parents weren't spared either. Without grandfather's money, their luxurious life crumbled overnight. They lost their home, their credit was destroyed, and soon they were forced to move into a small, rundown apartment on the outskirts of Los Angeles.
I didn't hear from them after that.
Months passed, and life slowly returned to normal. I focused on rebuilding my career, and thanks to my reputation being restored, I received a job offer that was even better than the one I lost. I was back on my feet, stronger than ever. One evening, I received a letter from prison. Sophia. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside was a single sentence. I see it now. You were always stronger than me. I folded the letter and set it aside. She was right. The ultimate betrayal had led to silent execution. Not by my hands, but by karma, justice, and the truth. And that was enough. When I was on a business trip, my stepmom called and said, I sold your $1 million bakery for just $750, your mother's dream bakery, and also drained your bank account. Tomorrow, the new owner will take over the office. I rushed back the next morning, and when I arrived at the office, I could not stop laughing because the bakery she sold was actually... I always believed Maple Street Bakery would be mine one day. It wasn't just a business. It was my mother's dream. Something she built with her bare hands, fueled by passion, hard work, and an unshakable belief in creating something meaningful. Some of my fondest childhood memories are of standing on a stool beside her, my hands covered in flour, as she patiently taught me how to knead dough. She used to say, a bakery isn't just about food, Chloe. It's about love. It's about making people feel at home. But life has a cruel way of taking things away. When my mother passed away, it felt like the world had lost its color. My father, Robert, was shattered, barely able to function. I was only 20, grieving but determined to keep my mother's legacy alive. I spent every waking hour at the bakery, helping the employees, ensuring that things ran the way she would have wanted. But then, Victoria entered our lives, a woman who seemed perfect at first. She was kind, warm, and understanding, and my father, desperate for companionship, fell in love with her quickly. Within 2 years, they were married, and she moved into our home, bringing along her daughter, Chloe. Yes, Chloe, we shared the same name, but we couldn't have been more different. She was spoiled, entitled, and had never worked for anything in her life. From the moment they arrived, everything started changing. At first, I tried to be welcoming. I wanted to believe that we could be a family. But it didn't take long for me to realize Victoria had an agenda. She slowly began asserting herself into the bakery, making changes without asking, acting as if it were hers. She talked to customers as if she had been there from the start, making subtle comments about how the business needed modernization and new leadership. My father, blinded by love and eager to please her, allowed it. The final blow came when I graduated from college and told my father that I wanted to run the bakery full-time. Victoria laughed. Oh, Chloe, you have a whole finance career ahead of you. Why waste it baking bread? My father, who once shared my mother's dream, agreed with her. I left that night. I took a job in corporate finance, moved away to New York, and threw myself into my work. Every time I visited home, the bakery felt less and less like my mother's and more like Victoria's. I tried not to care, told myself that maybe it was for the best, that I needed to let go. But deep down, I knew I was just trying to avoid the pain. Then, last week, everything changed. I was on a business trip in Chicago when my phone rang. Victoria. I hadn't spoken to her in months. Chloe, I just wanted to let you know. I sold the bakery. I nearly dropped my phone. What? My voice was barely above a whisper. Oh, Don't be so dramatic, she said, her tone smug. It was struggling anyway. Your mother's little passion project was bleeding money. It was time to move on. I felt my entire body tense with rage. You had no right. She chuckled. Oh, but I did. The paperwork went through last month. Tomorrow, the new owner takes over. It's done. And just like that, she hung up. I sat frozen in my hotel room, my mind racing. How could she sell my mother's bakery? How had my father let this happen? My heart pounded as I grabbed my laptop and started searching for business records. And that's when I found it. The bakery had been sold to a real estate investor named Mark Reynolds for $750,000. But something felt off. Victoria had always been manipulative, but this didn't make sense. My father never mentioned the sale. There was no message, no warning, nothing. I scrolled through the documents again and felt my stomach drop. The sale had my signature on it. But I never signed anything. I booked the first flight home. By the time I landed in Seattle the next morning, I was running on nothing but pure adrenaline. I barely stopped to breathe as I drove straight to the bakery. My mind was filled with questions, but one thing was clear. Victoria had gone too far this time. I stormed through the doors, expecting to see a stranger sitting in my mother's old office, taking over what was meant to be mine. But what I found made me stop dead in my tracks. The bakery was still operating. Employees were still working, customers still walking in, the scent of fresh bread still filling the air. Something wasn't right. I walked straight to the back office, ready to demand answers. And when I opened the door, I saw something that made me laugh, not from joy, but from pure disbelief. The bakery was still mine. Victoria had sold something that wasn't even hers to sell. And now she was going to pay for it. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at the documents on the desk. The contract, the signatures. My name was scrawled at the bottom in perfect cursive. Except I never signed it. My heart pounded. My hands shook. But then, something strange happened. I laughed. Not out of humor, but out of sheer disbelief. Victoria really thought she could get away with this? That she could just forge my name, sell my mother's bakery, and I'd never notice? I took a deep breath and tried to focus. I needed answers.
Now.
I stormed out of the office and made my way home, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly they ached. My father's house, the house I grew up in, looked the same, but everything inside felt different now. I found him in the kitchen, reading the newspaper like it was just another morning. "Dad," I said, my voice sharp. "Did you know Victoria sold the bakery?" He looked up confused. "Of course." She said it was struggling. It was time to move on. My stomach twisted. He had no idea. "Did you know she forged my signature to do it?" His face paled.
What?
I dropped the contract onto the table in front of him. "Look at this. My name is on it. But I never signed it." He picked up the papers, his hands trembling. I watched his face as he scanned the document, the realization sinking in. "She told me you agreed," he murmured. "She said you didn't want anything to do with it." I clenched my fists. That was a lie. And she's been lying to you for years. Just then, we heard footsteps. Victoria walked into the kitchen, holding her coffee cup like nothing was wrong. When she saw me, she smirked. "Oh, Chloe," she said sweetly. "You're back." "Cut the act," I snapped. "You forged my signature. You stole my mother's bakery. And now you're going to pay for it." She sighed dramatically, setting down her coffee. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. The bakery was failing. I did what was best for this family." "For you and Chloe, you mean?" I shot back. She didn't even flinch. "Your father agreed." I turned to him, desperate for him to stand up for me. "Dad, tell me you didn't know about this." He still looked stunned, like the world around him was crumbling. I didn't know about the forgery," he admitted. "I thought you signed the papers. I thought you didn't care anymore." Victoria smiled, pleased with herself.
"See?
No harm done." I gritted my teeth. "You stole my mother's dream and sold it like it was nothing. You lied to my father. And on top of that, I'm willing to bet you've been stealing money from the business for years. For the first time, Victoria's expression faltered. I knew I had her, and I wasn't done. I checked the records, I continued. The bakery was making a profit. So tell me, Victoria, where did the money go?
Silence.
Chloe, my stepsister, suddenly walked into the room, her phone in hand. Mom, what's going on? She took one look at the contract, the tension in the room, and scoffed. Oh my God, are we really doing this?
Chloe, move on.
It's just a bakery. My fury exploded. That was my mother's legacy, I hissed. Not some toy for you and your mother to sell when it's convenient. And if you think I'm just going to walk away, you don't know me at all. Chloe rolled her eyes. Whatever. I turned back to Victoria. I've already spoken to Lisa Romero. You remember her, right?
She's a lawyer now.
And guess what? Forgery is a crime. Victoria finally looked nervous. You wouldn't. I smiled. Oh, I absolutely would. She tried to recover, straightening her back. Mark Reynolds already paid for the bakery. You can't undo the sale. Actually, I said, holding up my phone, Mark and I had a little chat this morning. Turns out he doesn't like being scammed. And since you sold him something you had no right to sell, the contract is invalid. Victoria's face turned white. I wasn't done. You're not just losing the bakery, I said. You're going to jail for fraud. The panic in her eyes was priceless. Chloe, be reasonable. Reasonable? I laughed. You stole from me. You lied to my father. You tried to erase my mother's dream. And now, you're finally going to face the consequences. Chloe stepped forward, eyes wide. Mom? Victoria grabbed her purse. I need to make some calls. No, I said sharply. You need to get a lawyer. Because this wasn't over. Not even close. Victoria stormed out of the kitchen, Chloe right behind her, whispering something frantically. My father sat frozen, still holding the papers, his hands shaking. I could see the realization sinking in. He had been deceived, manipulated for years, and now everything was unraveling. But I didn't have time to console him. Not yet. I grabbed my keys and drove straight to Lisa Romero's office. She was already expecting me, her sharp brown eyes scanning the forged contract as I handed it over. This is bad, she said, flipping through the documents. She didn't just forge your signature, Chloe. She fabricated financial losses to justify the sale. That's fraud. I knew it, I muttered. And there's more, Lisa continued, pulling up bank records on her laptop. I did some digging last night. Over the past 5 years, Victoria has been draining money from the bakery's accounts. Small amounts at first, but it adds up. Close to $200,000 redirected to a personal account under her name. I felt my blood boil. So she's been stealing from my mother's bakery this whole time? Lisa nodded. And she used that money to make it look like the business was failing. She set this up long before she sold it. The pieces clicked together in my head. Victoria had been planning this for years. She had manipulated my father, pushed me out, and slowly bled the business dry, waiting for the right moment to sell. But what she hadn't counted on was me coming back. I exhaled sharply. What do we do now? Lisa leaned back, tapping her fingers against the desk. We go after her. Legally. If Mark Reynolds is willing to support the case, we have everything we need: fraud, embezzlement, forgery. She won't just lose the sale, Chloe. She could face prison time. I didn't hesitate. Do it. Lisa smirked. I thought you'd say that. An hour later, I was standing outside Maple Street Bakery, staring at the building that had once felt like home. It still smelled the same: warm bread, cinnamon, vanilla. But it wasn't mine anymore. Not yet. I stepped inside, ignoring the confused looks from the employees. They had probably heard Victoria's version of events. Where's Mark Reynolds? I asked one of the staff members. The young woman hesitated before pointing toward the office. He's in there, but Victoria was just here talking to him. Of course, she was trying to cover her tracks. I didn't bother knocking. I pushed the door open and found Mark sitting behind the desk, flipping through more paperwork. Victoria was standing across from him, her face red, clearly trying to convince him of something. When she saw me, she froze. I smiled. Oh, don't stop on my account. Mark sighed, rubbing his temples. Chloe, I was just about to call you. I walked in, keeping my eyes locked on Victoria. I bet you were. Victoria cleared her throat, trying to regain control. Mark, don't listen to her. She's trying to create drama. The sale is final. I pulled out my phone and held up the bank statements Lisa had given me. Mark, did she tell you she's been stealing money from the bakery for years? Or that she forged my signature to sell you something she had no legal right to sell? Mark's eyes flicked to the phone screen, his jaw tightening. Is this real? Victoria scoffed. Oh, come on. This is ridiculous. I placed the forged contract on his desk. It's very real. And if you go through with the sale, you'll be involved in a fraud case. Is that something you want? His expression darkened. He turned to Victoria. You told me everything was legitimate. Victoria blanched. It is. She's just. I already spoke to my lawyer. I cut in. And she's filing charges as we speak. You're done, Victoria. For the first time, fear flashed across her face. She turned to Mark, desperate now. This is a misunderstanding. We can fix this. Mark stood up. You lied to me. This deal is off. Victoria took a step back, shaking her head. No, you can't just. I can, he snapped. And I will. Because I don't do business with frauds. I watched as reality hit her. Her entire plan had collapsed. She had nothing left. Leave, Mark said firmly.
Now?
Victoria glared at me, hatred burning in her eyes. But she knew she had no choice. She turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Mark ran a hand through his hair. I should have done better research before making the deal. I shook my head. You weren't the one scamming people. That's on her. He nodded. I'll have my lawyer send over the paperwork to reverse the sale. The bakery is yours again, Chloe. The words hit me like a wave. Mine. I had done it, but I wasn't finished yet. Victoria might have lost the bakery, but I wasn't about to let her walk away unpunished. She had stolen from me, lied to my father, and almost destroyed everything my mother built. Now it was her turn to pay. I left Mark's office feeling lighter, but I wasn't done yet. Victoria had taken so much from me, from my father, from the business my mother built with love. Just because I had the bakery back didn't mean she could walk away unscathed. She needed to face the consequences. When I got home, I found my father sitting at the kitchen table, his head in his hands. The papers I had left with him were still there, scattered across the table like shattered pieces of the truth. He looked up at me, his eyes tired and full of something I hadn't seen before, shame. I should have seen it, he murmured. I should have known. I pulled out a chair and sat down across from him. You trusted her, Dad. That's not your fault. But now you know the truth. He sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. I let her turn me against you. I let her take everything your mother built. I don't even know how to fix this. I reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. We start by making sure she doesn't get away with it. His gaze sharpened. What do you mean? I leaned forward, my voice steady. Lisa has already filed charges for fraud and embezzlement. Victoria could be facing serious legal trouble. And I'm not backing down. For a moment, he didn't say anything. Then finally he nodded. I'll support whatever you need to do. It was the first time in years I felt like my father was truly on my side again. Just then, the front door slammed open. Victoria. She stormed in, her face twisted in rage. Chloe trailed behind her, looking anxious, her phone clutched tightly in her hands. You, Victoria spat, pointing a manicured finger at me. You think you've won? I folded my arms. I don't think. I know. Her eyes darted to my father. Robert, are you really going to let her do this to me? After everything I've done for this family? My father stood up, his voice firm. You didn't do anything for this family, Victoria. You used us. You stole from my daughter. You lied to me. And now you're going to pay for it. Victoria laughed, but it was hollow. You think I'm just going to roll over and let you ruin my life? No, I said, tilting my head. I think you already did that yourself. She turned to Chloe, desperation in her voice. Sweetheart, say something. Tell them this is all a mistake. Chloe shifted uncomfortably. Mom, she hesitated. I didn't know about the money. Victoria's eyes widened. Are you seriously turning against me? Chloe shook her head. I don't want to be involved in this. That was the thing about people like Victoria. They taught their children selfishness, and then were shocked when that selfishness wasn't in their favor. I pulled out my phone and hit play on a recording. Victoria's voice filled the room. It was struggling anyway, Chloe. Your mother's little passion project was bleeding money. It was time to move on. Victoria froze. I recorded our phone call, I said calmly. And I sent it to the lawyer. Along with the bank records. Along with the proof of forgery. Along with the fraudulent financial reports you submitted before the sale. Victoria's face turned white. This is checkmate, I continued. Lisa just confirmed. The police have the evidence now. You might want to start packing your things, because I doubt you'll be staying here much longer. You can't do this, she hissed, voice shaking. I built this family. No, my father interrupted. You tore it apart. Chloe took a step back, shaking her head. I need to go. She bolted out the door, leaving her mother standing alone, surrounded by the wreckage she had caused. For once, Victoria had nothing to say. The silence stretched between us before she let out a bitter laugh. You think you're better than me? I met her gaze.
No.
But I'm not a liar. I'm not a thief. And I don't destroy people to get what I want. She turned to my father, making one last desperate attempt. Robert, please. I love you. He shook his head. I don't believe you. With that, he turned away. That was the end of it. Victoria packed up and left that night, but not before the police came knocking the next morning. Fraud charges don't just disappear, and Lisa made sure every piece of evidence was airtight. Victoria wasn't getting out of this one. As for Chloe, she texted me once, a single message I didn't know. I didn't respond, because she had known enough. The bakery was mine again, but it wasn't just about ownership. It was about taking back what was stolen. It was about restoring something my mother built and refusing to let her dream be erased. My father and I stood in the middle of the shop a few days later, watching as employees bustled around, kneading dough, frosting cakes, breathing life back into the place. She would be proud of you, my father said softly. I blinked back the sting in my eyes. I hope so. He put an arm around my shoulders. I know so. For the first time in years, I felt like things were right again. Victoria had tried to erase me. She had tried to take everything from me. But in the end, she lost everything. And I won. My husband's secret affair with his young secretary was just the start. They worked together to plant hidden devices, making $40 million in stolen profits. But his next plan was even worse. The very next day, I got my revenge and left them shocked when they found out their $40 million was actually... My name is Emma Carter, and if you told me a year ago that my life would become the kind of drama you see in suspense novels, I would have laughed. I was living a perfectly normal life, or so I thought. I had a decent career as a journalist in Austin, Texas, where I wrote about local events, social issues, and sometimes politics. My husband, Ryan, was a senior executive at a big real estate firm, and our 16-year-old son, Ethan, was our pride and joy. Smart, driven, and incredibly gifted with technology, he had this knack for solving problems. I never imagined just how crucial that skill would become for us. It all started one Saturday morning. Ethan was in my office helping me set up some new software on my computer. I had promised him pancakes for breakfast, but he was laser-focused on the task as usual. Mom, your chair feels weird, he said, running his hand along the base. Like there's something stuck inside. I didn't think much of it. I assumed it was a loose screw or maybe a part of the chair's mechanism. But Ethan's curiosity got the better of him. He grabbed his toolbox from his room and started unscrewing the base. That's when he found it, a small, square device no bigger than a matchbox, taped discreetly inside the frame. What is that? I asked, leaning over his shoulder. He turned the tiny device over in his hand, his face scrunched in concentration. It's a transmitter, he said finally. Looks like it's meant to record audio and maybe track your location. I laughed nervously, sure it had to be some kind of mistake. Maybe it's from when this chair was in the newsroom. It's probably old and broken. But Ethan wasn't convinced. He plugged the device into his laptop and started running some programs to figure out what it was doing. What he found changed everything. The device wasn't broken. It was very much active. It had been recording my conversations and even logging my location for months. Ethan showed me how it was transmitting data to an untraceable network. My heart sank as I realized that someone close enough to access my office, had planted it. My first instinct was to panic. Who would do this?
And why?
Ryan's name didn't even cross my mind at first. He was my husband of 15 years, the person I had trusted with everything. He was always busy with work, but I'd chalked that up to his high-pressure job. Never once did I suspect him of anything sinister. Ethan, however, was more practical. We need to figure out where this data is going, he said. If this thing has been in here for months, someone's been watching you, Mom. I called Megan, my best friend from college and a cybersecurity expert. When I explained what we'd found, her reaction was immediate. Emma, this isn't a prank. Someone is targeting you. Bring me everything, and I'll help you trace it. The three of us, Megan, Ethan, and I, spent hours analyzing the data. What we found left me feeling sick. The device was connected to a private network tied to Ryan's firm. It wasn't just tracking me. It was part of a larger system used to monitor high-profile individuals across the city. The data was being used to manipulate property deals. Megan showed me the patterns. Influential property owners were coerced into selling their assets at ridiculously low prices. The firm would then flip those properties for tens of millions of dollars in profit. Ethan was the first to ask the question I was too afraid to voice. Mom, do you think Dad knows about this? I wanted to dismiss it, to defend Ryan. But the deeper we dug, the harder it became to ignore the truth. There were links between the network and Ryan's work email. He had signed off on the installation of surveillance devices in properties he managed. My husband wasn't just aware of this scheme. He was part of it. I couldn't bring myself to confront him immediately. I needed to know more. Megan suggested we look for similar devices in our house. We started in Ryan's home office, where Ethan found 2 more transmitters, one in his desk drawer and another in the light fixture. Each device confirmed what I was dreading. Ryan had been monitoring not just me, but our entire family. That night, I lay awake in bed, my mind spinning. Ryan slept beside me, his face calm, as if he weren't hiding a dark secret. I felt like a stranger in my own home. How long had he been doing this?
Why?
And, most importantly, what was he planning to do with all this information? The next morning, Ryan left for work as usual, kissing me on the cheek and saying, "Love you," like he always did. I forced a smile, my stomach in knots. Once he was gone, I turned to Ethan.
We're not letting this slide, I said.
But we need to be careful. If your dad is involved in something illegal, there's no telling how far he'll go to protect it. Ethan nodded, his eyes full of determination. Then let's take him down. It was the first time I realized how much Ethan had grown. He wasn't just my son anymore. He was my ally. And, together, we were going to uncover the truth, no matter what it took. After Ethan and I decided to uncover the truth, there was no turning back. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. This was my husband, the man I'd shared my life with, spying on me, on our family. What made it worse was the nagging question. Why? Was it about money, power, or something even darker? The first step was to gather more proof. Megan helped us dig into Ryan's work files, starting with his emails. Ethan was surprisingly adept at bypassing the security measures on Ryan's devices. Dad's passwords are too simple, he muttered one evening, his fingers flying over the keyboard. Seriously, success 2022? Who even uses that? We found emails, dozens of them, between Ryan and someone named Lila Dawson. At first, they seemed like routine exchanges about work projects, but Megan spotted the red flags. Look at the timestamps, she pointed out. These aren't just work emails. They're coded messages. He's coordinating something. Ethan leaned closer. And this Lila person, she's involved. Look at this attachment. It was a spreadsheet listing properties Ryan's firm had recently acquired, all with purchase prices far below their market value. Beside each one was a projected profit. The total was staggering, $40 million. My heart sank. This wasn't just a side hustle. This was a full-blown scheme. But the real blow came when we found a folder labeled custody case. My blood ran cold as I opened it. Inside were fabricated reports claiming I was emotionally unstable, along with audio files that had been edited to make me sound unfit as a mother. There were even surveillance photos of Ethan and me, taken without our knowledge. I sat back, shaking. He's planning to take Ethan away from me? Ethan, sitting beside me, clenched his fists. No way. He doesn't get to do this. Megan put a reassuring hand on my shoulder. This is serious, Emma. If Ryan's willing to go this far, he's not just protecting his scheme. He's eliminating threats, starting with you. We needed more help. That's when I thought of Jack Thornton, a retired detective I'd worked with on a story years ago. Jack had a reputation for being tough but fair, and he knew how to operate in the gray areas of the law. I called him that night, explaining everything. Emma, this sounds bad, he said, his gravelly voice steady. If he's involved in something this big, you can't confront him directly. We need to gather solid evidence and hit him where it hurts. Jack agreed to meet us at his office the next day. It was a dingy little place above a diner, with mismatched furniture and a faint smell of old coffee. But Jack's expertise was undeniable. He went through everything we'd uncovered, piecing together the puzzle like the seasoned investigator he was. This Lila Dawson, he said, tapping her name on the printout. She's a weak link. People like her don't stay quiet forever. If we can find her, she might be willing to talk. It didn't take long to track her down. Lila worked late hours at the firm, often alone in her office. I decided to approach her myself, against Jack's advice. You're too close to this, he warned. Let me handle it. But I couldn't sit back anymore. I waited outside her office one evening, my heart pounding. When she finally stepped out, I intercepted her in the hallway. Lila, I said, keeping my voice low. We need to talk. It's about Ryan. Her face paled. I don't know what you're talking about, she stammered, glancing around nervously. Yes, you do, I pressed. I know about the properties, the surveillance, the blackmail. I know everything. Lila froze, her eyes wide. I can't, she whispered. They'll come after me. After my family. Who? I asked, stepping closer. Ryan? The firm? Tell me what you're afraid of. For a moment, she hesitated. Then she broke. It's not just Ryan, she said, her voice trembling. It's the whole organization. They control everything. If I talk, they'll kill my brother. My heart ached for her. Lila, I can help you. I have a retired detective and a cybersecurity expert on my side. We can protect you and your brother. But you have to trust me. She stared at me, tears in her eyes, before nodding slowly. Okay, I'll tell you what I know. What she revealed was worse than I imagined. The surveillance devices weren't just used to track people, they were part of a larger scheme to control them. The firm targeted wealthy property owners, collected dirt on them, and forced them to sell. The profits were funneled into shell companies, some of which were linked to Ryan's personal accounts. But that wasn't all. Lila showed me a calendar entry for an upcoming meeting at a warehouse on the outskirts of town. It was a meeting between Ryan and the organization's leaders. They're finalizing the next phase, she said. If you want to stop this, that's where you need to be. I left the office feeling a mix of dread and determination. Ryan wasn't just complicit in this scheme, he was a key player. And now, thanks to Lila, we had a chance to bring it all crashing down. When I got home, Ethan was waiting for me, his laptop open on the kitchen table. Mom, he said, his voice steady but urgent, I hacked into Dad's network. There's more. This isn't just about money. They're laundering it through fake charities, even Ethan's college fund. I felt my knees go weak. He used your college fund? Ethan nodded. We have to stop him. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. We will. But we have to be smart. This is bigger than Ryan. It's about the whole organization. And we're going to take them down. By the time we reached the third night after discovering the surveillance device, I was running on sheer adrenaline. My once peaceful life was now a maze of secrets, betrayals, and plans for a fight I never thought I'd have to face. With Lila's information, the scope of Ryan's betrayal felt even bigger than before. He wasn't just lying to me, he was using our family as pawns in a larger, far darker game. I sat at the dining table with Ethan and Megan, planning our next steps. Jack joined us, spreading out a map of Austin with several locations circled in red. One of those was the warehouse where the upcoming meeting was set to take place. This is our chance to catch him, Jack said, tapping the map. If we can record this meeting, we'll have enough evidence to take to the FBI. But we need to be careful. These people aren't just white-collar criminals. They're dangerous. Ethan leaned forward, his expression determined. I've been digging into the network, he said. I found encrypted files that I think are the organization's records. If I can crack them, it'll prove everything. Can you do it remotely? Megan asked. Ethan nodded. I'll need time, but I can do it. And if I sync with the warehouse's Wi-Fi during the meeting, I might be able to intercept live data. Jack raised an eyebrow. That's risky, kid. You sure you can pull it off? Ethan didn't hesitate. I have to. I looked at my son, amazed by his courage. We're not putting you in harm's way, I said firmly. You'll stay here with Megan. Jack, and I will handle the warehouse. Ethan opened his mouth to argue, but I cut him off. No discussion, Ethan. You're helping us enough by cracking those files. His jaw tightened, but he nodded reluctantly. The night of the meeting, my nerves were on edge. I parked a block away from the warehouse, the dark streets of Austin eerily quiet. Jack sat beside me, checking the small camera we'd hidden inside a nondescript backpack. This will give us a live feed, he said. As long as we stay out of sight, they'll never know we're here. I nodded, gripping the steering wheel tightly. Let's do this. We slipped into the shadows and approached the warehouse. The building was massive, its exterior lit by a single flickering light. Jack led the way, keeping low as we reached a side window. Inside, I could see Ryan pacing alongside 3 men I didn't recognize. They all exuded an air of power and authority. I pressed the earpiece in my ear and whispered, Ethan, are you getting the feed? Got it, he replied. And I'm syncing with the warehouse's network now. Give me a few minutes. I took a deep breath and focused on the scene inside. Ryan was speaking, his voice sharp and confident. The next properties are lined up. Once the transactions are complete, we'll funnel the funds through the charity accounts. One of the men nodded. Good. We've kept a low profile so far, but this needs to go smoothly. No more mistakes. Ryan stiffened slightly. There won't be any mistakes. The tension in his voice made my stomach twist. This was my husband, the man I'd trusted for years, casually discussing a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. I felt both anger and heartbreak, but I couldn't let either overwhelm me. I had to stay focused. Jack whispered, they're moving toward the desk. Something's happening. Inside, Ryan pulled out a stack of documents and handed them to the men. These are the revised agreements. Once we have signatures, we're locked in. Ethan, I murmured, can you get a copy of those? Working on it, he said. I'm almost in. Suddenly, one of the men looked toward the window. Jack and I ducked out of sight, my heart racing. They didn't see us, Jack muttered. But we need to stay sharp. Ethan's voice came through the earpiece. I'm in. I've got the files, and I'm intercepting their data stream. Good work, Megan added. Now get out of there. Before we could move, the sound of a door slamming made us freeze. I peeked through the window and saw Ryan answering his phone. His expression darkened. What do you mean there's a breach? He snapped. Jack and I exchanged panicked glances. They've detected me, Ethan said, his voice tense. I'm locking them out, but I need a few more seconds. Finish it fast, I whispered. We're running out of time. Ryan hung up the phone and turned to the men. "We have a problem," he said. "Someone's accessing the network." One of the men pulled out a gun. "If this is a setup, Carter, you're done." My blood ran cold. The situation was spiraling out of control, and I had no idea how we were going to get out of it. I've always thought of myself as calm under pressure. Years as a journalist had taught me how to stay composed, even in the face of chaos. But standing outside that warehouse, hearing Ryan and his accomplices talk about a breach and watching one of them pull a gun, that kind of fear was different. It clawed at my chest, threatening to paralyze me. Jack motioned for us to move back, his eyes sharp. "We can't stay here. They're on edge. If they spot us, we're done." I nodded, but my feet felt heavy. Ryan was in there, tangled in something far worse than I'd ever imagined. A part of me still hoped he might snap out of it, admit his mistakes, and try to fix them. But seeing how far he'd gone, the lies, the surveillance, the fake custody case, it was clear that wasn't going to happen. Through the earpiece, Ethan's voice broke the silence. "Mom, I've locked them out of the system, but they're scrambling to regain control. I'm downloading the rest of the files now." "Good," I whispered. "Stay focused. We're almost there." Inside the warehouse, Ryan was pacing, his frustration boiling over. "We need to secure the data. If someone's in the network, they could take everything." One of the men slammed a fist on the table. "You better fix this, Carter. We're not risking our operation because of your mistakes." I said I'll handle it. Ryan snapped, his voice shaking. Jack nudged me. "We've got enough. Let's get out of here." But before we could retreat, the door to the warehouse burst open. FBI agents flooded the room, their weapons drawn. "Federal agents. Hands in the air," one of them shouted. My breath caught in my throat. Jack grinned. "That's my guy," he muttered, clearly relieved. Through the chaos, I saw Ryan freeze. For a brief moment, our eyes met through the window. His expression wasn't one of anger or guilt, it was fear. Pure, unfiltered fear. "Emma," Ethan's voice came through again, this time panicked. "Something's wrong. They're trying to track me down. I think Dad gave them access to my IP address."
"What?"
My heart dropped. "Ethan, disconnect."
"Now."
"I'm trying," he said, his voice shaking. "But they're fast." Inside the warehouse, one of the men lunged for a laptop on the desk. An FBI agent tackled him, but not before he managed to send a final command. Jack's phone buzzed, and he frowned at the screen. "They've locked onto Ethan's location. We need to get to him," I said, fear clawing in my chest. Jack didn't hesitate. "Let's move." We raced back to my house, my mind spinning. If Ryan's people knew where Ethan was, they wouldn't hesitate to come after him. He was the key to everything, the files, the data, the proof that could dismantle their entire operation. When we burst through the door, Megan and Ethan were huddled over his laptop. "Mom," Ethan called, relief flashing across his face. I managed to disconnect, but it was close. "Too close," Jack muttered, checking the locks on the doors. "We need to secure this place." Before we could react, my phone buzzed. A text message appeared on the screen, sent from an unknown number. "You thought you could outsmart us. Think again." I showed it to Jack. "They're not giving up." Megan frowned. "They're bluffing. We have the files. They can't undo what's already been sent." Ethan's eyes widened.
"Wait.
What if they're not bluffing? What if they have something bigger planned?" His words hit like a lightning bolt. This wasn't just about covering their tracks. They were desperate. And desperate people were dangerous. As if on cue, the power in the house went out, plunging us into darkness. My heart pounded as Jack pulled out a flashlight. "They've cut the power. Stay close." Ethan grabbed his laptop. "I still have battery. I can finish decrypting the files." Megan nodded. "Do it. We'll keep you safe." The next few minutes were a blur. Jack stood guard at the front door, his hand hovering near his concealed weapon. Megan and I barricaded the windows, working quickly in the dim light. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, his fingers flying over the keyboard. Finally, he let out a triumphant shout. "Got it. The files are decrypted. I'm sending everything to the FBI." "Good," Jack said. Now let's get out of here. Before we could move, headlights flooded the driveway. A sleek black car pulled up, and Ryan stepped out. He was alone, his hands raised as if in surrender. "Emma," he called. "Let me explain." Jack moved to block the door, but I stopped him. "Let me handle this," I said, stepping outside. Ryan looked disheveled, his confident demeanor shattered. "Emma, I didn't mean for it to go this far," he said, his voice pleading.
They forced me.
"I didn't have a choice." "You always had a choice," I said coldly. "You chose greed. You chose lies. And you chose to betray your own family. Emma, please." "No," I snapped. "It's over, Ryan. The FBI has everything. They're shutting down the operation as we speak." His face twisted in desperation. "You don't understand. They'll come after me. They'll come after you. We need to work together." I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. "We're not a team anymore. You destroyed that." The sound of sirens in the distance broke the tense silence. Ryan's shoulders slumped as he realized the fight was over. "Emma, I'm sorry, but it was too late for apologies." The FBI arrived moments later, taking Ryan into custody. As they led him away, I felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. The man I'd once loved was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized. In the weeks that followed, the fallout was massive. The FBI dismantled the organization, arresting dozens of key players. Ethan's files became critical evidence, exposing years of fraud and corruption. Ryan, facing a mountain of charges, eventually pleaded guilty in exchange for a lighter sentence. As for me and Ethan, we rebuilt. Slowly but surely, we created a new life, one grounded in trust and resilience. I returned to journalism, writing an exposé on digital surveillance that sparked national attention. Ethan channeled his tech skills into helping others protect their privacy. Looking back, I realized that betrayal doesn't just destroy, it reveals. It strips away the lies, forcing you to see what's real. And in the end, we found something far more valuable than the life we'd lost, the strength to fight for what truly mattered. My husband was on a business trip when my manipulative mother-in-law and sister-in-law threw my belongings out of the house, blaming me for being an outsider. Their next plan was to sell my condo and force me onto the streets to beg, but my secret revenge ruined their plan. My name is Harper Carter, and if there's one thing I've learned in life, it's that family isn't always defined by blood. Sometimes, the ones you trust the most are the ones who will betray you in ways you never imagined. But let me start from the beginning. I was 8 years old when my life shattered. My parents died in a tragic car accident, leaving me alone in a world I wasn't ready to face. The days after their funeral were a blur. Relatives whispered about who would take me, but no one actually wanted me. I remember sitting on the porch of our house, staring at the road, hoping my parents would somehow walk back through the door. Then came the Hendersons, my elderly neighbors. They weren't related to me by blood, but they saw something in me that no one else did. Mr. and Mrs. Henderson took me in, fed me, clothed me, and most importantly, loved me. We didn't have much, but we were happy. I grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, in a small but cozy house filled with warmth. Mr. Henderson was a retired schoolteacher, and he would help me with my homework every night. Mrs. Henderson was a gentle woman who baked the best apple pie. Life wasn't perfect, but it was stable. I had a home. I had parents again. But fate had other plans. When I was 20, just as I was preparing for college, tragedy struck again. A fire broke out in our house, late one night. By the time I woke up to the smell of smoke, it was too late. The firefighters pulled me out just in time, but the Hendersons didn't make it. In the span of a few hours, I lost the only family I had left. The house was gone. My life was gone. I had no choice but to sell the small piece of land it stood on. With the little money I got, I packed up and moved to Miami, Florida, determined to start over. I enrolled in college to study finance, hoping that if I could understand money, maybe I could control my future a little better. Those years were tough. I worked 2 jobs, barely slept, and had no one to rely on. But I kept going, telling myself that I would never be helpless again. After graduating, I landed a great job as a financial consultant. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and gave me a sense of security. For the first time, I felt like I was in control of my life. Then I met Ryan Carter. It was at a business event. I wasn't looking for love, but there he was, charming, ambitious, and full of life. He made me laugh in a way I hadn't in years. We talked about everything and nothing, and by the end of the night, I didn't want to say goodbye. 2 years later, he proposed in the most Ryan way possible. No grand gestures, no audience. Just the two of us on the couch watching an old movie. He pulled a ring from his pocket and said, "Marry me," like it was the simplest decision in the world. And for me, it was. We got married and built a life together in Miami. We weren't rich, but we were happy. For the first time since I was a child, I felt safe. But happiness never seems to last long in my life. One evening, Ryan came home with big news. He had been offered an international business opportunity that could change our future. The catch? He had to leave for a whole year. It wasn't ideal, but I encouraged him to take it. After all, we had our whole lives ahead of us. What was 1 year apart? What I didn't know was that this 1 year would change everything. Shortly after Ryan left, his parents, George and Margaret Lancaster, fell ill. His mother, Margaret, called me in tears, begging me to come to Orlando to help them. I didn't hesitate. They were family. I packed my bags, arranged to work remotely, and moved into their house in the suburbs of Orlando. At first, things were fine. George was weak, but still had his spirit, and Margaret was grateful for my help. I managed their medications, cooked, cleaned, and made sure they had everything they needed. I even sent money from the rent I earned on my Miami condo to help with their expenses. Then, one day, Nicole Palmer walked through the door. Nicole was Margaret's daughter from a previous relationship. I had never met her before, but Ryan had warned me about her. She had a history of trouble, laziness, and manipulation, but I had no idea just how much damage she could do. From the moment she arrived, she made it clear. I was an outsider in her mother's house. She didn't even pretend to be nice. She ignored me, made passive-aggressive remarks, and dismissed everything I did. At first, I tried to brush it off. I told myself she was just adjusting to the situation. But then, Margaret started changing too. She stopped thanking me for my help. She became colder, more distant. And every time Nicole whispered to her behind my back, I knew something was being said about me. I had no proof, but I could feel it. The walls of the house were closing in on me. And then George passed away. Ryan flew home for the funeral, and I finally had a moment of relief, thinking that with him back, things would get better. But I couldn't bring myself to tell him what was happening. Not yet. He had just lost his father, and I didn't want to add to his pain. After the funeral, Ryan left again, promising he'd be back as soon as he could. But the moment his plane took off, Nicole made her move. One day, I came home from a grocery run to find all my belongings dumped in the garage. My clothes, my shoes, everything. I walked inside, furious. What the hell is going on? Nicole sat at the kitchen table, smirking. Oh, don't look so shocked, Harper. This isn't your house. You're just a guest. Margaret stood beside her, silent. She didn't even look at me. That night, I checked my bank account and felt my stomach drop. Someone had drained a large amount of money from my account. I confronted Margaret, but she acted completely indifferent. "You're exaggerating," she said. "We needed the money." That was the moment I knew I was no longer family. I was their target, and I had to get out before things got worse. But Nicole wasn't going to let me leave that easily. I should have left that night. I should have packed my bags and walked out the door. But a part of me still clung to the idea that maybe things would get better. Maybe Margaret would come to her senses. Maybe I was overreacting. I wasn't. The next morning, I found Nicole lounging on the couch, flipping through a stack of my bank statements. My bank statements. I snatched them from her hands. "What the hell, Nicole?" She smirked, completely unfazed. "Relax. I was just trying to understand how someone like you managed to own a Miami condo. Must have been nice, huh?" I felt a chill run down my spine. "Stay out of my things." She leaned back, sipping coffee like she owned the house. You don't get it, do you? You don't belong here. You never did. I clenched my fists. I'm here because your mother asked for my help. Nicole rolled her eyes.
Right.
And now you've done enough. Why don't you be useful and sign over that Miami condo to Mom? She's struggling, you know. That's when it clicked. This wasn't just about making me uncomfortable. This was about money. My money. I turned to Margaret, who had just walked into the room. Margaret, tell me this isn't true. You're not trying to take my home from me. Margaret wouldn't even look at me. She just stood there, wringing her hands. It's not like that, dear. We just thought you wouldn't mind helping out. Helping out? They had already drained thousands from my account behind my back. Now they wanted me to give them everything I had. I shook my head. Absolutely not. Nicole's smirk vanished. Her eyes darkened. You really think you're better than us, don't you? I didn't answer. I grabbed my bag, stormed up the stairs, and locked my bedroom door. My hands were shaking. I needed to leave. Tonight. But Nicole had other plans. That night, as I packed, my bedroom door burst open so hard it slammed against the wall. Before I could react, Nicole grabbed me by the arm and shoved me against the dresser. The edge of the wood dug into my back as she leaned in close, her breath hot and furious against my face. You think you can just walk away? She hissed. You owe us. I shoved her back, but she was stronger than I expected. She grabbed a fistful of my shirt and yanked me forward, causing me to stumble. My head smacked against the nightstand, sending a sharp pain through my skull. I tasted blood. Margaret stood in the hallway, watching. Not stopping her. Just watching. That was the moment I knew I was on my own. Nicole stood over me, breathing heavily, waiting for me to fight back. But I wasn't going to play her game. I wasn't going to break, not in front of her. Slowly, I wiped the blood from my lip and forced myself to stand. You're making a mistake, Nicole. She laughed, shaking her head.
No, Harper.
The mistake was letting you in here in the first place. I stared at Margaret, hoping, praying, for some kind of humanity. Some sign that she knew this was wrong. But her expression was cold. Empty. I was nothing to her now. I walked past them, ignoring the throbbing in my head, and locked myself in the bathroom. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my phone. I needed to get out of here. But then, I heard voices outside the door. She won't leave, Nicole said. Not unless we force her. My heart started pounding. Margaret's voice was hesitant. Nicole, maybe we're going too far. No, Nicole snapped.
She's weak.
She'll cave. I backed away from the door. They weren't just trying to intimidate me anymore. They were planning something worse. I needed proof. I hit record on my phone and pressed it against the door. Their voices spilled into the tiny space. She'll never sell unless she has no other option, Nicole said. We just need to keep pushing.
She'll break.
And once she does, we'll take everything. I had enough. I grabbed my bag, shoved my phone inside, and quietly unlocked the bathroom window. I wasn't going to wait around for whatever they had planned next. I was done playing nice. I climbed out into the night, feet hitting the cold grass. I didn't look back. I ran. The second my feet hit the grass, I sprinted through the backyard, my heart hammering so loudly I could barely hear anything else. The night air was cold, but my skin burned with adrenaline. I didn't care about anything except getting away. I reached the street and pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking as I called a cab. I knew I couldn't go back inside for my car, not without facing Nicole again. As I stood under a flickering streetlight, waiting, I kept my eyes on the house. I half expected Nicole to come charging out after me, but the door stayed closed. Maybe she thought she had scared me into submission. She had no idea what was coming. The moment I got in the cab, I called Ryan. He answered groggily. He was still overseas, and it was the middle of the night where he was. Harper. His voice was thick with sleep. What's wrong? I took a shaky breath. Ryan, I need you to listen carefully. Your mother and Nicole, they've been stealing from me. They drained my account. And tonight, Nicole attacked me.
Silence.
Then, his voice turned deadly serious. Where are you now? In a cab. I'm going straight to Miami. Good. Don't stop. I'm booking the next flight home. For the first time that night, I let out a shaky breath of relief. I wasn't alone. By the time I got back to my apartment in Miami, I felt like I had just escaped a war zone. I locked the door, closed the curtains, and immediately backed up all the recordings on my laptop. I replayed Nicole's words over and over. She'll never sell unless she has no other option. We just need to keep pushing.
She'll break.
And once she does, we'll take everything. I wasn't going to break. I wasn't going to let them win. The next day, I called my bank. I reported the unauthorized transactions, froze my accounts, and filed a fraud report against Margaret and Nicole. Then I went to the police. I played the recording, showed them the bruises on my arms, and filed an assault charge against Nicole. It felt surreal, like I was finally taking my power back. 3 days later, Ryan arrived home. The second he stepped inside, I collapsed into his arms, finally letting go of everything I had been holding in. He held me tightly, his anger barely contained. I should have been there, he murmured, kissing the top of my head. You're here now, I whispered. But I wasn't done yet. That afternoon, we drove back to Orlando.
Not to stay.
Not to make peace, but to end this once and for all. We pulled up in front of the house, and just as I expected, Nicole was outside on the porch, looking smug as ever. She stood when she saw me. Well, look who's back. Did you finally? Ryan stormed past her, straight into the house. Mom, he bellowed. Get out here.
Now.
Margaret stepped into the living room, looking nervous. She glanced at me, then at Ryan. Ryan, honey, Don't, Ryan snapped. I know everything. Harper told me what's been happening. The money you stole, the way you treated her, how you stood there and let Nicole attack my wife. Nicole folded her arms. Oh, please. She's overreacting. Ryan turned on her so fast that she actually took a step back. Shut up. His voice was cold, controlled, but his fury filled the entire room. Nicole scoffed. What are you going to do, huh? Call the cops? Ryan's smile was ice. Too late. They're already on their way. Nicole's face drained of color. Margaret gasped. Ryan, no. You made your choice, Mom. His voice shook with emotion, but he didn't waver. You picked Nicole over me. Over Harper. And now you're going to pay for it. Margaret turned to me, her eyes pleading. Harper, sweetheart, you wouldn't do this to family. I stared at her for a long moment. Then, I spoke calmly, firmly, without hesitation. You were never my family. Sirens blared outside. And for the first time since I met her, Nicole Palmer looked scared. As the police cars pulled up in front of the house, Nicole's cocky smirk finally vanished. She glanced at Margaret, as if expecting her to do something, but Margaret looked just as pale and stunned. Ryan stepped beside me, his hand firm on my back, offering silent support. 2 officers approached the porch, their expressions unreadable. Harper Carter, one of them asked. I nodded.
Yes.
I'm the one who filed the report. I handed them the audio recordings, the bank statements, and the medical report documenting the bruises on my arms. The officers listened, their faces darkening as they played back Nicole's own words incriminating herself. One of the officers turned to Nicole. Miss Palmer, we need you to come with us. Nicole flinched. Wait, what? This is ridiculous. She turned to Margaret. Mom, do something. Margaret just stood there, her face twisted in panic. Officer, this is all a misunderstanding. Ma'am, the officer interrupted, his tone firm. We have enough evidence for fraud and assault charges. Your daughter is coming with us. Nicole tried to push past them, but another officer grabbed her arms. You can't do this, she screamed. Ryan, you're really letting them arrest me? For hers? Ryan's expression didn't waver. You did this to yourself. Nicole's face twisted with rage. She looked at me, and for a moment, I thought she might lunge at me again. But instead, she spat out, You ruined my life. I didn't flinch. No, Nicole. You ruined your own life. The officers hauled her toward the squad car as she kicked and screamed the whole way. Margaret turned to Ryan, her voice breaking. Ryan, please, she's your sister. She made mistakes, but she's family. Ryan stared at her for a long moment, his jaw tight, his eyes cold. You stopped being my mother the moment you let her put her hands on my wife. Margaret reached for him, desperate. Please, son, don't leave me like this. I have nothing left. I thought for a moment Ryan might soften. But then he took a step back and shook his head. This was your choice, Mom. His voice was quiet but firm. And I'm making mine. Margaret broke down right there on the porch as the squad car pulled away, taking Nicole with it. I should have felt guilty. I should have felt something. But all I felt was relief. A few weeks later, Nicole was formally charged with fraud and theft. It turned out I wasn't the only one she had been stealing from. Several elderly victims came forward once the news broke. The state had more than enough evidence to convict her. She was sentenced to 8 years in prison. Margaret, on the other hand, lost everything. With Nicole gone, she had no money, no support, and no way to afford the house. She called once, a desperate, shaky voicemail. Harper, sweetheart, I made a mistake. I was weak, and I let Nicole take control. I know I hurt you, but please, please help me. I have no one else. I sat there, listening to the message in silence. Then I deleted it. She had made her choice. I was never going back. In the months that followed, Ryan and I focused on rebuilding our lives. We moved into a new home in Tampa, far away from the ghosts of our past. And then one morning, I took a pregnancy test. When I saw the 2 pink lines, I felt a wave of emotions hit me all at once.
Excitement, fear, hope.
I sat on the bathroom floor, staring at the test, when Ryan walked in.
Harper.
He frowned. What's wrong? I looked up at him, tears in my eyes, and whispered, I'm pregnant. His eyes widened, and for a second, he didn't move. Then, without warning, he laughed, a deep, joyful, disbelieving laugh, and pulled me into his arms. We're having a baby, he murmured against my hair. I closed my eyes. We're having a baby. It felt like the final piece of my life falling into place. I had fought. I had suffered. I had lost. But in the end, I won. And as I stood there, in the safety of Ryan's arms, I knew our son, Liam, would never have to know the kind of betrayal I had endured. Because we would protect him. Because we would be the kind of family I had always dreamed of. The past was behind me. The future was mine. And I was finally free. My mother-in-law shattered my happiness, turning my life into a gilded cage. She crushed my career, treated me like a servant, while my husband stood silent. Suffocated, I chose revenge. I switched her medication and walked away. An hour later, my husband called, panic in his voice. I listened, unmoved, then laughed at his helplessness. The game had just begun. They say marriage is a partnership, a bond built on love, trust, and devotion. But in my case, it was a trap. A beautifully decorated prison wrapped in luxury, yet suffocating in every way possible. My name is Olivia Carter, and this is the story of how I lost everything, only to reclaim it all in ways no one ever expected. I met Daniel Carter when I was 26. I was a schoolteacher in Los Angeles, working hard to build a life of my own. He was everything I thought I wanted: handsome, charming, wealthy. He made me feel special, chosen. At first, it was a dream. The extravagant dates, the whispered promises of forever. When he proposed, I didn't hesitate. I should have. I didn't know then what I was truly marrying into. Daniel's family was old money, built on generational wealth and a ruthless business empire. But the real power wasn't in Daniel, it was in his mother, Patricia Carter. From the moment I stepped into the Carter estate, I knew I was an outsider. Patricia made sure of that. You're not what I expected, she said to me the first time we met, her sharp eyes scanning me like I was some unwanted object. I love your son, I had replied, forcing a polite smile. Love. She scoffed, sipping her wine. Love doesn't keep a family like ours together. Power does. I laughed nervously, thinking she was joking. She wasn't. I wanted to be a good wife, to fit into their world. I gave up my teaching job, at Daniel's insistence, because a Carter wife shouldn't have to work. I was naive. I thought it was about taking care of me. But in reality, it was about control. Patricia ruled the house with an iron grip. Nothing happened without her approval. She monitored my every move, criticized my every decision. You should wear your hair differently, something more elegant. That dress looks cheap, Olivia. A Carter woman should look like money. Your place is to support Daniel, not to have ambitions of your own. I tried to win her approval, but nothing was ever enough. And Daniel? He did nothing. At first, I thought he just didn't notice. But then I realized he didn't care. He had grown up under Patricia's rule, conditioned to obey her. If she belittled me, he ignored it. If she controlled me, he let her. And then there was the gambling. Daniel was the golden boy in public, a successful businessman, the perfect son. But behind closed doors, he had a dark side. He gambled. A lot. At first, I didn't think much of it. A few nights at the casino, some high-stakes poker games. But then I noticed the money disappearing. The late-night phone calls. The frustration when he lost. It's just a game, Olivia, he told me once, brushing off my concerns. You worry too much. But I knew better. Then came the women. I wasn't stupid. I saw the signs. The lipstick stains, the perfume on his clothes, the text messages he tried to hide. Every time I tried to confront him, he brushed me off. You're overreacting. Don't act like some jealous wife, Olivia. If you were more exciting, maybe I wouldn't need to go out so much. I should have left then. I should have run. But where would I go? I had no job, no money of my own. They made sure of that. Patricia had convinced Daniel that I didn't need an income, that a real Carter wife relied on her husband. And so, I stayed. Then, everything changed. Patricia started getting sick. It wasn't sudden, but I noticed before anyone else. She was losing weight, moving slower, clutching her chest when she thought no one was looking. The doctors confirmed it, a heart condition. At first, I felt sorry for her. She was cruel, but she was still human. I tried to take care of her, thinking maybe, just maybe, this would bring us closer. But Patricia remained the same bitter woman. Don't pretend you care, Olivia, she snapped. You're just waiting for me to die. She wasn't wrong. I didn't want to be this person, but after years of being treated like nothing, something inside me snapped. For the first time, she needed me, and I wasn't going to waste the opportunity. It started with the medication. I was the one who gave Patricia her pills every day, and so I adjusted the doses. Not enough to kill her, just enough to make her weaker. She became more dependent on me, more fragile, more powerless. And while she was slipping away, Daniel was self-destructing. His gambling debts were piling up. His business was starting to crumble. And his so-called best friend, James Walker, was feeding his addiction, pushing him into riskier deals. I listened to their heated phone calls. I watched as Daniel became desperate. And I realized I didn't need to destroy him. He was doing that all on his own. I played the part perfectly. I was the caring wife, the dutiful daughter-in-law. I pretended I didn't know about the financial disaster, about the affairs, about the lies. I waited, because soon everything would fall apart. And this time, I wouldn't be the one left with nothing. Daniel's downfall began long before he realized it. At first, the cracks were small, missed payments, bad investments, quiet whispers in the business world that the once mighty Carter empire was weakening. But like any man too arrogant to admit his mistakes, he ignored the warning signs. He still believed he was untouchable, still thought his last name carried enough weight to protect him from the mess he had created. I watched it all unfold, playing my role carefully, ensuring that he never suspected how much I truly knew. Every night, he came home later, his face drawn with stress, his patience thinner. He started drinking more. When I asked him what was wrong, he brushed me off, muttering vague excuses about business issues and temporary setbacks. But I had already gone through the paperwork in his office. The debts were real, the losses were staggering, and the vultures were already circling. Patricia, oblivious to what was happening, continued to believe her son could do no wrong. Even as her health declined, she remained sharp enough to criticize me. Her words weren't as biting as before. She didn't have the energy for that. But the disdain was still there, thinly veiled beneath her weakening voice. She depended on me now, relied on me for even the simplest things, but that didn't mean she respected me. "You think you've won, don't you?" she muttered one afternoon as I adjusted the pillows behind her back. I looked at her, feigning innocence. "Won what, Patricia?" She exhaled sharply, as if I had disappointed her yet again. "This house. Daniel. You think if I'm gone, everything will fall into place for you?" I smiled softly, tilting my head. "You should rest, Patricia. Stress isn't good for your heart." She glared at me, but there was something else in her eyes, uncertainty, maybe even fear. For the first time, I think she understood what I had known for years. She was no longer the powerful matriarch she once was. She was at my mercy now, and there was nothing she could do about it. As Patricia grew weaker, Daniel grew more desperate. I could hear the tension in his voice every time he spoke to James Walker, his business partner, the man who had led him down this reckless path. James had never cared about Daniel's success, only about what he could gain from him. And now, when Daniel needed his help the most, James was conveniently unavailable. One evening, after another failed deal, Daniel lost his temper. He came home late, his tie undone, his face flushed with anger and alcohol. I was sitting on the couch, pretending to read, when he stormed in and threw his briefcase against the wall. Papers scattered across the floor, a visible mess of unpaid bills and foreclosure notices. "We're ruined, Olivia," he muttered, collapsing onto the couch beside me. I turned to him slowly, making sure my face showed just the right amount of concern. "What do you mean?" He ran a hand through his hair, shaking his head. "James screwed me over. The deal I was counting on, it's gone. Everything is falling apart." I placed my hand over his, squeezing gently. "Daniel, we'll figure something out." He scoffed, pulling away. "There's nothing to figure out. The banks are breathing down my neck. We're drowning in debt. And my mother," he trailed off, his face clouded with something between frustration and despair. "What about her?" I asked softly. He let out a bitter laugh. "She's not in any shape to help. And even if she were, she'd probably rather die than admit I failed." I bit my tongue, resisting the urge to tell him the truth, that Patricia had already handed over control of her finances to me, trusting that I would protect them better than he ever could.
He didn't need to know that yet.
Not yet. That night, after Daniel passed out in a drunken haze, I stood by our bedroom window, staring out at the city lights. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for. Everything was collapsing around him, and all I had to do was wait a little longer. A few nights later, Patricia collapsed. I was in the kitchen when I heard the thud upstairs. At first, I didn't move. I let a few seconds pass, letting the silence stretch. Then, slowly, I made my way to her room. She was on the floor, clutching her chest, her face twisted in pain. Her breathing was labored, her fingers weakly grasping at the sheets as if trying to pull herself up. Her eyes found mine, wide and desperate. "Help me," she gasped. I stood there for a moment, watching her struggle. It would be so easy to walk away, to let nature take its course. But no, I needed to play this right. I knelt beside her, brushing a strand of silver hair from her damp forehead. "You always told me I didn't belong here," I murmured. "That I was lucky to be a Carter." Her grip on my wrist tightened for a moment, but it was weak. "But Patricia," I continued, lowering my voice, "it's you who doesn't belong anymore." Her breath hitched, her eyes searching mine, but there was nothing she could do. I reached for the phone, dialing 911 with steady fingers. "My mother-in-law," I said, making sure my voice shook just enough to sound believable. "I think she's having a heart attack." By the time the paramedics arrived, Patricia was gone. Daniel was devastated, but not in the way a grieving son should be. He didn't cry at the funeral. He didn't say much at all. Because Patricia's death wasn't just the loss of a mother, it was the loss of his last safety net. The day after the funeral, he sat in his office for hours, staring at the wall, saying nothing. When I brought him coffee, he finally spoke. "We're going to lose the house." I set the cup down on his desk carefully. But what about your companies? He let out a humorless laugh. It's already gone. I didn't pretend to be shocked. I just placed a hand on his shoulder and squeezed. I'm sorry, Daniel. He sighed, rubbing his face. I don't know what to do. And for the first time, I realized something. Daniel had never truly been powerful. He had never been in control. He had always been a coward, hiding behind his mother, his money, his last name.
But all of that was gone now.
And he had no idea that the final blow was still coming. Daniel had always been proud, the kind of man who believed he was invincible, untouchable. But now, sitting in his office, hunched over his desk, he looked nothing like the man I had married. His suit, once perfectly tailored and pristine, was wrinkled. His tie was loosened, and his eyes, bloodshot and weary, stared blankly at the wall. He hadn't shaved in days, hadn't eaten much either. I could see the weight of his failures crushing him, and for the first time, I saw him exactly for what he was, a man who had lost everything. I should have felt pity, but I didn't. The house was slipping away, the banks preparing to seize it. His company, once a powerful name in the business world, had crumbled beneath his reckless hands. His so-called friends had disappeared, James Walker being the first to cut ties when the money ran out. The gambling debts had piled too high, and now there was no one left to bail him out. Even Patricia, the one person who had always cleaned up his messes, was gone. And I had made sure of that. He looked up at me finally, his jaw tightening. We need to figure something out, he said, his voice hoarse. There has to be a way to fix this. I tilted my head, pretending to think. The money's gone, Daniel. The company is bankrupt. The house is about to be foreclosed. What else is left to fix? His hands curled into fists.
You don't understand.
We can rebuild. We can sell some things, get investors. I shook my head. There's nothing left to sell, Daniel. No one is coming to save you. He exhaled sharply, standing up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Then help me, Olivia. You have money. My mother left you everything. I took a slow breath, waiting for this moment. No, Daniel. She left it in my name. It's not yours. His eyes darkened, his nostrils flaring. That's my family's money. I took a step forward, meeting his gaze without fear. And you spent every penny of what was yours. Patricia didn't trust you to handle the rest, and for good reason. His expression shifted, disbelief washing over his face. You planned this, didn't you? His voice was low, accusing. I smiled just a little. Not at first. But once I realized what you were, I adapted. He ran a hand through his disheveled hair, laughing bitterly. You think you've won? I shrugged. No, Daniel. I think I've survived. He lunged forward suddenly, grabbing my wrist tightly. You're not going to just walk away from this. I didn't flinch. I already have. His grip loosened, and I stepped back, adjusting the sleeve of my blouse. The divorce papers are in the living room. I suggest you sign them. His laugh was bitter, filled with disbelief. You're divorcing me now? I sighed, as if I were explaining something simple to a child. Daniel, there's nothing left. The business is gone. The house is gone. You have nothing to offer me. So tell me, why would I stay? He was silent, his jaw clenched, his hands shaking at his sides. I let the moment stretch, then turned on my heel, walking toward the door. Before stepping out, I paused. I'll be leaving tomorrow. I suggest you figure out where you're going to stay. And then I walked away. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint sounds of Daniel pacing downstairs. He was unraveling, his entire world falling apart, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. He had built his life on lies, on arrogance, on the belief that his name alone would always be enough. But he had never been strong. He had never been smart. And now, he was just a broken man with nowhere left to turn. I should have felt satisfied, but I didn't. Not yet. The next morning, I woke to the sound of movement downstairs. When I entered the living room, Daniel was standing there, the divorce papers spread out on the coffee table. He had a pen in his hand, but he wasn't signing. He was just staring at them, his face unreadable. I walked past him, pouring myself a cup of coffee, waiting. Finally, after a long silence, he spoke. What happens to me now? I glanced over my shoulder. That's not my problem. His jaw clenched. You really don't care, do you? I took a sip of my coffee. You never cared when I needed you. Why should I care now? His hands tightened into fists, but he didn't argue. He knew the truth just as well as I did. Without another word, he picked up the pen and signed the papers. The moment he did, I felt something shift inside me. It was over. I left the house an hour later, the same house that had once felt like a prison. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Daniel was a man who had spent his whole life looking down on me, believing he would always be the one in control. But now, the tables had turned, and he had no one to blame but himself. As I drove away, I allowed myself a small smile. Daniel Carter was finally nothing, and I was finally free. I left without looking back. The Carter estate, once a symbol of wealth and power, now stood as nothing more than a hollow structure, stripped of its grandeur, abandoned by the people who once held it so high. Daniel was still inside when I walked out, but I didn't care to see his reaction. Whatever he felt, anger, regret, disbelief, none of it mattered anymore. He had spent years pretending I was invisible, treating me like a possession instead of a person. Now, I had done the same to him.
He was nothing to me.
Just a man I used to know. I rented a small apartment by the ocean, a place that wasn't extravagant but gave me something more valuable than gold: peace. For the first time in years, I could wake up without feeling trapped, without hearing Patricia's sharp words or wondering if Daniel would come home reeking of another woman's perfume. The silence was comforting. I didn't need the lavish lifestyle, the designer clothes, the expensive jewelry. I had money now more than I would ever need, but it wasn't about the wealth. It was about knowing that every single thing in my life was mine. I spent my days slowly rebuilding what I had lost. I returned to teaching, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Standing in a classroom again reminded me of the person I used to be before I lost myself in Daniel's world. I had been happy once, content with simple things, and I was determined to find that again. My new life wasn't about revenge anymore. That chapter was already closed. It was about reclaiming the years that had been stolen from me. Then one afternoon my phone rang. I recognized the number immediately. I debated ignoring it, letting it go unanswered, but curiosity got the better of me. I pressed accept. Olivia. Daniel's voice was quieter than I remembered, drained of its usual confidence. I didn't respond right away. I waited, letting the silence stretch, forcing him to be the one to fill it. I just wanted to talk, he finally said. I took a slow breath. About what? Another pause. I could almost hear him struggling to find the words. You really don't care, do you? No, I said simply. He exhaled a hollow sound. I lost everything. I closed my eyes briefly, not out of sympathy, but out of exhaustion. I had nothing left to give him, no comfort, no concern. He had made his choices. He had lived recklessly, selfishly, and now he was finally seeing the consequences. I don't know where to go, he admitted. It was strange hearing him like this. Daniel had always been proud, arrogant even. The idea of him being lost, uncertain, would have seemed impossible before. But now, he was just a man without money, without power, without the safety net of his mother's influence. A man who had burned every bridge until there was nowhere left to turn. That's not my problem, I said, my voice calm, detached. There was a long silence, and then, barely above a whisper, he said, You really won. I didn't answer because it wasn't about winning. Winning meant that there was a game to be played, that I had fought for some grand victory. But this wasn't a game. This was survival. I had been left with nothing, pushed to the point where I had no choice but to fight for myself. And now I wasn't standing on top of some empire, I was just free. Goodbye, Daniel, I said, and then I ended the call. I didn't think about him again after that. He was a part of my past, a chapter one had no interest in rereading. I traveled after that, something I had always wanted to do, but never had the chance. Italy, France, Greece. I explored each place at my own pace, no longer answering to anyone, no longer waiting for permission to live my life. Every step I took, every new experience, reminded me that I had been waiting for so long. Waiting for Daniel to change. Waiting for Patricia to accept me. Waiting for someone to rescue me. But in the end, I had saved myself. One evening, as I sat at a cafe in Paris, watching the sun set over the Seine, I felt something that had once seemed impossible. I felt light. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying the weight of the past. I wasn't bound by bitterness or anger. I wasn't looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next fight, the next insult, the next betrayal. I was free. And for the first time in my life, I belonged to myself. My mom called me crying. Grandpa was badly injured. Stay home. He needs you,
she said.
I canceled my trip, only to see their vacation photos online. But that wasn't the worst part. They stole my $3 million and cut me out of everything. When I uncovered the truth, I destroyed them. I never thought my own family would betray me like this. Looking back, the signs were always there, but I ignored them, convincing myself that I was just imagining things. I worked hard, kept my head down, and did everything I could to prove my worth. But in the end, it didn't matter. They had made their decision long before I ever realized it. My name is Sophia Carter, and I was raised in San Diego, California, in a wealthy but deeply divided family. My father, Mark Carter, built a successful hotel business from the ground up. He always prided himself on being a self-made man, but that was a lie. The real foundation of our family's success came from my grandfather, Walter Carter. He was the true mastermind, the one who invested wisely and made sure our family had financial security. He left behind a trust fund worth millions, meant to be split between me and my younger brother, Ethan. But somewhere along the way, my parents decided that only one of us deserved it. Ethan was always the golden child. He got everything handed to him: private school, expensive cars, elite connections, while I had to work for everything. Even as a child, I could see the difference in how we were treated. If Ethan wanted something, my parents made it happen. If I needed help, they told me to figure it out. I always thought that if I worked hard enough, they would finally see my value. I graduated with honors, became a financial analyst, and saved every penny I could. But I was wrong. No matter what I did, it was never enough. A few months ago, our family planned a vacation to Hawaii. It was supposed to be a time to relax, enjoy the sun, and finally reconnect. I was excited, more than I had been in years. I worked extra hours to save for the trip, bought new clothes, and even took time off work. It was going to be a fresh start, or so I thought. Then, just a day before we were supposed to leave, my mother, Linda, called me, her voice trembling. "Sophia, honey, there's been an accident," she said, barely holding back sobs. "Your grandpa slipped and got hurt badly. We need you here." My stomach dropped. Grandpa was everything to me. He was the only one who had ever been fair, the only one who treated me with love and respect. Without thinking twice, I canceled my flight, packed my bags, and rushed to his house, worried sick. But the moment I stepped inside, my entire world shattered. There was Grandpa sitting in his chair, perfectly fine, reading a book. He looked up at me, surprised. "Sophia? What are you doing here?" Confusion swirled inside me. Mom called me. She said you had a bad fall and needed help. Grandpa's expression darkened. He set his book down and sighed, rubbing his temples. "She told you that?" My heart started pounding. Something wasn't right. "Grandpa, what's going on?" I asked, my voice shaking. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then he looked me in the eyes, his face filled with something I had never seen before. Anger. "She wanted me to lie," he said, his voice sharp. "She called me days ago, asking me to play along if you came here. Said it was for family harmony. But I told her I wouldn't do it." My breath caught in my throat. Lie about what? Grandpa exhaled slowly and reached for my hand. "That trip, Sophia. They never wanted you to come." I felt like someone had punched me in the chest.
No.
That couldn't be true. My mind raced, searching for another explanation. Maybe there was a misunderstanding. Maybe. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket. Absent-mindedly, I pulled it out and looked at the screen. A notification from Instagram. I opened the app, and my entire world collapsed. Right there, staring back at me, was a photo of my family at the beach resort in Hawaii. My parents, Ethan, aunts, uncles, cousins, all of them, smiling, laughing, cocktails in hand, enjoying the vacation I was supposed to be on. And then I saw the caption, written by Ethan himself. Family vacations are the best. So grateful for this beautiful trip. My hands trembled as I stared at the screen. My mind couldn't process what I was seeing. They had lied.
They had manipulated me.
They had never wanted me there. Tears burned in my eyes, but I refused to cry. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my palms. My mother had looked me in the eye and lied to my face. My father, the man who always told me to work hard and earn my place, had intentionally excluded me. Ethan, the brother I had defended for years, had blocked me out without a second thought. I turned to Grandpa, my voice hollow. Why?
His jaw tightened.
I don't know, sweetheart. But I do know one thing. He squeezed my hand. This isn't just about a trip. There's something bigger going on. I nodded, my mind racing. He was right. This betrayal wasn't just about the vacation.
It was deeper than that.
I took a deep breath, wiping away my tears. If they thought I was just going to sit back and take this, they were wrong. I was going to find out the truth. And when I did, they would regret ever trying to shut me out. I barely slept that night. I sat on Grandpa's couch, staring at my phone, scrolling through the vacation photos over and over again, each one hitting me like a fresh wound. They were all there, Mom, Dad, Ethan, my aunts and uncles, laughing, drinking, celebrating. My mother's arm was around my brother's shoulders like he was the prized child, the one who mattered most. They had lied straight to my face, using Grandpa as a cover. The betrayal was like a fire burning inside me, but I wasn't going to let it consume me. I needed answers. Grandpa sat next to me, his face grim. There's something I need to tell you, Sophia. I turned to him, my pulse quickening. I've had my suspicions for a long time, he continued, but I didn't want to believe your parents would actually do this to you. He reached into the drawer of his desk and pulled out a thick folder. Asterisk, asterisk. When he handed it to me, I hesitated. Something told me that whatever was inside would change everything. I opened it, my fingers trembling. Inside were bank statements, legal documents, trust fund reports, things I had never seen before. Grandpa's voice was heavy with disappointment. This is everything I've been collecting over the years. Your trust fund, Sophia, it was supposed to be split evenly between you and Ethan. My throat tightened. Supposed to be? He nodded. Your parents drained your portion, slowly, over the years. First, for Ethan's private school tuition. Then his luxury car. Then his failed businesses. Every major expense he ever had, it came from your inheritance. I felt like I couldn't breathe. All those years I worked extra hours, struggled to make ends meet, sacrificed my time, while Ethan was given everything without lifting a finger. They took what was mine and handed it to him like a gift. How much? I whispered, barely able to form the words. Grandpa hesitated before answering. Almost everything. The original trust fund was worth $3.5 million. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to keep my emotions in check. $3.5 million.
Gone.
Given to Ethan. There's more, Grandpa said, his voice dropping lower. They're not just stealing from you. They're planning to transfer the entire hotel business to Ethan. My eyes snapped open. What?
He sighed.
Your father is finalizing the paperwork now. Once it's done, Ethan will have full ownership. And you'll be left with nothing. I shook my head in disbelief. But the business was supposed to be for both of us. It was, Grandpa said. That's why I gave your father control years ago, trusting that he would do the right thing. But he's made it clear, he only sees Ethan as his heir. I clenched my fists. They hadn't just stolen from me. They were erasing me. All those years of playing the responsible daughter, working hard, proving my worth, it was for nothing. They had already made up their minds long ago. Grandpa put his hand on mine. You don't have to accept this, Sophia. A slow, cold realization settled in my chest. He was right. I had spent my entire life trying to earn my family's love, thinking if I just worked harder, did better, maybe they would see me as an equal. But they never would. They had underestimated me. I wasn't going to let them win. I want to stop them, I said, looking Grandpa in the eye. But I don't know how. He smiled, the first genuine smile I had seen since this nightmare started. That's why we're not doing this alone. That's when he pulled out his phone and called someone. Minutes later, my Aunt Rebecca walked through the door. Aunt Rebecca had always been the black sheep of the family, but I had always admired her. She had been a high-powered lawyer before retiring, and unlike my parents, she had never treated me like I was invisible. She sat down across from me, looking at the folder Grandpa had given me. She flipped through the papers, nodding. This is solid proof, she said. They've been embezzling from your trust fund. And if they're moving money offshore, that means they're planning to run. I frowned. Run? Where? Switzerland, Grandpa said, his voice hard. Your father has been transferring money into secret accounts there. They want to disappear before you realize what's happening. I felt the rage rise in my chest. So not only had they stolen my money, my future, and my place in the family, they were going to run away with whatever was left? We can stop them, Rebecca said firmly. But we need to act fast. I took a deep breath. This was it. I had spent my whole life playing by their rules, letting them control me.
But now?
Now I was going to take everything back. What do we do first? I asked. Rebecca leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. First, we expose them. Publicly. I hesitated. Publicly. She nodded. They think they have all the power. But the one thing they care about more than money? Their reputation. I thought about it.
She was right.
My parents thrived on appearances. They wanted to be seen as the perfect, successful family. If the truth came out, it would ruin them. A small smile formed on my lips. Then, let's ruin them. Rebecca grinned. That's my girl. I picked up my phone and started typing. If they thought they could erase me, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. I had never been the kind of person to seek revenge. I had spent most of my life trying to earn love and approval, believing that if I just worked hard enough, my parents would finally see me as worthy. But that version of me was gone. They had taken everything from me, my inheritance, my place in the family business, even my dignity, and I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I sat with Aunt Rebecca and Grandpa as we mapped out our plan. The first step? Exposing them. My parents had built their entire lives around their perfect image, respected business owners, devoted parents, an ideal family. They cared more about their reputation than anything else. I opened Instagram, staring at Ethan's smug vacation photos. His latest post showed him standing on a balcony, a drink in hand, captioned, "A well-earned break. Nothing like success to make life sweeter." I clenched my jaw. Success? He didn't earn a thing. Everything he had was stolen. I typed my own post and hit send. Funny how my parents lied about Grandpa being injured just to keep me from this family vacation. Even funnier how the hotel business and my trust fund, meant to be shared, are now in my brother's name. Stolen money, stolen business, and they thought I'd never find out. I leaned back, watching the numbers climb. Within minutes, the post had hundreds of comments. Some were from distant family members, shocked at the betrayal. Others were from business associates, questioning the legitimacy of my parents' dealings. And then came the calls. The first was from Ethan. "What the hell, Sophia?" His voice was frantic, low, like he was trying to keep from being overheard. I let him stew in silence for a second before answering. "Oh, you saw it? Good. Take it down."
No.
"You're making Mom and Dad look bad." I let out a short, humorless laugh. "I'm making them look bad? Ethan, they stole from me. They lied to me. And now they're trying to disappear with what's left. You're lucky all I did was post the truth." He was quiet for a moment before he said, You don't understand the full picture. I gritted my teeth. Oh, I understand plenty. The next call was from my mother. Sophia, take that post down immediately. Her voice was cold, clipped, the tone she used when she thought she still had control over me. No, I said simply. You're embarrassing this family. Do you have any idea what you're doing? I laughed bitterly.
Yeah, Mom.
I'm doing what I should have done a long time ago, standing up for myself. She exhaled sharply. Sophia, listen to me. We had reasons for what we did. Your father and I have always looked out for what's best for this family. By stealing my trust fund? By making sure things were handled properly. We knew what was best. If we gave you that money, you wouldn't have known how to use it wisely. Ethan needed it more, right? I cut her off. That's the part you're about to say. He was more responsible. He was the better choice for the business. Just admit it, Mom. You never wanted me to have anything. She was silent for a long moment before she said, If you don't take the post down, you'll regret it. I smiled. Oh, I think you're the ones who are about to have regrets. By the end of the day, the fallout had begun. Journalists started asking questions about the legitimacy of my parents' business. Employees at the hotels, who had once stayed silent, began speaking up about unpaid wages and questionable financial moves. Grandpa had called in a few business contacts, and suddenly, investors were reconsidering their trust in my father's leadership. That night, Rebecca and I filed a lawsuit to freeze the hotel business transfer. My parents hadn't finalized the paperwork yet, but they were close. Legally, if we could prove that the transfer was done through fraud or manipulation, we could stop it in its tracks. But we had one last move left to play. Grandpa had one final document up his sleeve, his original contract with my father, the one that had placed him in charge of the business. There was a clause in it that had been conveniently ignored all these years. If proof of misconduct was ever found, control of the business could be revoked. The next morning, I showed up at the corporate office, walking straight into my father's office, where he and my mother were shredding documents. Dad looked up, his face turning red. You don't belong here. I smiled coldly. Actually, Dad, I do. I held up Grandpa's contract. And I think you'll want to read this. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. They knew they had lost. For years, I had felt powerless. I had watched my parents favor Ethan, watched them strip me of opportunities, watched them lie to my face and pretend I was part of this family when in reality, I was just an inconvenience to them. But standing in my father's office that day, holding the contract that would destroy everything they had planned, I finally understood something. I had never been powerless. My father snatched the paper from my hands, his eyes scanning over the words, his expression darkening with every second. My mother stood behind him, her face pale, gripping the desk like it was the only thing keeping her upright. I crossed my arms. You ignored this clause, didn't you? My voice was steady, controlled. The one that says if you ever engaged in financial misconduct, you'd lose your control over the business? Dad slammed the contract onto his desk. This is nonsense. You don't know what you're talking about. I smiled, a slow, knowing smile. Oh, but I do. I pulled out another set of papers from my bag. Because I have bank records, financial reports, and proof that you embezzled from the trust fund that was legally mine. Mom's hands started to shake. Sophia, let's talk about this. I raised an eyebrow. Oh, now you want to talk. I let out a cold laugh. Where was this concern when you were handing over my money to Ethan? Or when you were transferring the business to him behind my back? Ethan stormed into the room then, out of breath, his face red. You're ruining everything, he spat. Why can't you just let this go? Why do you have to destroy the family? I tilted my head. Oh, you mean the family that just spent years stealing from me? The family that pretended I didn't exist. He threw up his hands. You're just jealous. I had to laugh at that. Jealous? Of him? He had spent his entire life coasting on money that wasn't his, living in a delusion where everything was handed to him while I had worked my way through life. Jealous. I repeated, stepping closer.
No, Ethan.
I'm just done being used. At that moment, the doors to the office opened, and two federal agents walked in, followed by Aunt Rebecca and Grandpa. My father's face drained of color. "What is this?" he demanded. One of the agents, a tall man in a suit, stepped forward. "Mr. Carter, we have evidence that you and your wife have been involved in fraudulent financial activities, including embezzlement and illegal offshore transfers. We're placing you both under arrest." My mother gasped, looking at my father in sheer panic. "Mark, do something." But there was nothing to be done. As the agents placed cuffs on both of them, my father turned to me, his eyes filled with rage. "You think you've won?" he hissed. "You think you're better than us?" I held his gaze, my expression unreadable. "No," I said quietly. "I just finally decided to fight back." Ethan took a step back, realizing the reality of the situation sinking in. He looked at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. "You ruined everything, Sophia." I shrugged.
No, Ethan.
"You did." As they were led away, I felt something inside me shift. For the first time in my life, I felt free. The aftermath was quick and merciless. The legal case against my parents moved swiftly, with Rebecca leading the charge. With their financial crimes exposed, the court ruled that the transfer of the business to Ethan was fraudulent and voided the deal. My parents lost everything, and Ethan, without their financial backing, was left with nothing. Grandpa took legal action to restore my rightful ownership of my trust fund, but the damage was already done. Most of the money was gone. Instead, the court awarded me full control of the hotel business, as I was the only one legally entitled to it now. And just like that, the thing my parents had fought so hard to take away from me was now mine alone. At first, I wasn't sure if I wanted it. Taking over the company meant stepping into the mess my father left behind. It meant fixing the damage, rebuilding trust with employees, and proving that I wasn't like him. But then I thought about everything I had lost, everything I had fought for. And I knew. I wasn't just taking back what was mine. I was building something better. 3 months later, I walked into the Carter Hotel headquarters, this time not as an outsider, but as its rightful owner. Employees who had once been afraid to speak now approached me openly, grateful that the toxic reign of my parents was over. I made changes, real changes. I implemented fair wage policies, created a scholarship fund for employee families, and restructured the company to ensure transparency. Ethan tried to reach out once, a pathetic attempt to get back into my good graces. I didn't respond. Some wounds don't heal, and some people never change. My parents were sentenced to prison for financial fraud, and for the first time in my life, I stopped caring about their approval. I sat with Grandpa one afternoon, looking out over the ocean from the balcony of one of our newly renovated hotels. He took a sip of his coffee and smiled. "You know, your grandfather would be proud of you," he said. "You took their betrayal and turned it into something they never expected." I smiled back. "What's that?" He reached over and squeezed my hand. "Your victory." And he was right. In the end, they had stolen from me, lied to me, and tried to erase me from my own life. But all they had really done was push me to find my strength. Their betrayal wasn't my downfall. My obsessed twin sister stole my husband to get his $250 million company. Within a week, he died in an accident. She laughed at his funeral and said, "My plan was successful." But when the lawyer read my husband's will, everyone was stunned. His written words were, "I never thought my life would turn out this way. If someone had told me years ago that I would be standing where I am now, I wouldn't have believed them." But life has a cruel way of showing us the truth about people, about love, and most importantly, about ourselves. Let me start from the beginning. I was born in Chicago, Illinois, the quiet twin, the one no one really noticed. My sister, Isabella, was the complete opposite. Loud, confident, radiant. She walked into a room, and everyone turned to her, their eyes filled with admiration. My parents, our teachers, even strangers. It was always Isabella they praised. "Look at her," my mother would say, watching Isabella charm her way through another conversation. "She's going to do great things." And me? I was barely a footnote in their world. From the moment we could walk, Isabella had a natural talent for drawing attention. It wasn't just her looks, though she was undeniably beautiful. It was her ambition. She knew what she wanted, and she knew how to get it. I was just the girl standing next to her, the one people forgot about. While she shined in school, excelled in social circles, and later climbed the ranks in the fashion industry, I found solace in something quieter, writing. I always had a way with words, an ability to express emotions on paper that I could never seem to articulate out loud. So, while Isabella became the darling of our family, I moved to Chicago and started working as a journalist. It wasn't glamorous, but I loved it. I loved telling stories that mattered. And for once, I felt like I had a purpose beyond being Isabella's twin. Then Nathan Collins walked into my life. I met him at an event I was covering. He was everything I thought I wanted: charming, intelligent, successful. A tech entrepreneur, already making millions before turning 35. But what really drew me to him wasn't his success, it was the way he looked at me. For the first time in my life, I felt seen. Nathan wasn't like my parents, who dismissed me, or like Isabella, who overshadowed me. He made me feel special. He listened when I spoke, he laughed at my jokes, and he made me believe that I was worth loving. We dated for 2 years, and when he asked me to marry him, I didn't hesitate. I thought I had finally found someone who chose me over Isabella. For a while, it was perfect. We built a life together, one that felt simple and safe. We moved into a beautiful townhouse, spent our evenings cooking together, and made plans for the future. I thought I had escaped my past, the comparisons, the loneliness, the feeling of never being good enough. But perfection never lasts. The first signs of change were subtle. Nathan started coming home late, his affection grew distant, and his once warm eyes became cold. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. He was just busy. Work was stressful. He still loved me. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I started noticing the little things. The way he avoided eye contact. The way his phone was always face down on the table. The unfamiliar perfume on his clothes. I tried to ignore it, tried to pretend I was imagining things. Then one evening, my entire world shattered. Nathan sat across from me at the dinner table, barely touching his food. His voice was cold, detached, like he was discussing business, not our marriage. I want a divorce. His words hit me like a gunshot to the chest. I sat there, frozen, my fork slipping from my fingers. I stammered, my heart pounding. "I've made up my mind," he said flatly. "I don't love you anymore, Sophia." I couldn't breathe. This was the man who had promised to love me forever, the man who had made me believe I was finally enough. "Is there someone else?" My voice barely came out. Nathan didn't answer. The silence was enough. I felt my world collapsing, but before I could even process what was happening, the doorbell rang. And that's when I saw her.
Isabella.
She walked in like she owned the place, her high heels clicking against the floor, her smug smile sending a chill through my body. "Surprise, Sophia." She didn't need to say anything else. The way she looked at Nathan said it all. It wasn't just a divorce. My own sister had stolen my husband. I felt the ground disappear beneath me, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. I turned to Nathan, praying, begging, to see regret in his eyes. But he didn't even look at me. I had never felt so betrayed. Isabella crossed her arms, tilting her head, enjoying the moment. "You always lived in my shadow," she said. "It's time you stayed there for good." I wanted to scream, to cry, to fight back, but I couldn't. I was too shattered, too broken, too betrayed. People say that betrayal is like a knife to the heart. They're wrong. It's worse than that. A knife wound heals. Betrayal? It lingers. It infects every memory, every moment, every piece of who you are. I don't remember how long I sat there that night, staring at Nathan and Isabella, my mind refusing to accept the reality before me. My husband, my sister, together. Nathan barely looked at me as he stood up, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored designer suit, like this was just another business meeting he was walking out of. Isabella, on the other hand, was enjoying every second of it. She placed a perfectly manicured hand on his arm, tilting her head with that same self-satisfied smirk I had grown up seeing. "I assume you won't make this difficult, Sophia," she said, her voice sickeningly sweet. Difficult? I could barely breathe, let alone fight back. I felt humiliated. My own sister had stolen my husband, and neither of them had the decency to hide it. Nathan cleared his throat, finally looking at me. But there was no guilt, no regret, just a cold indifference. "I'll make sure you're financially taken care of," he said, as if that was supposed to make it better. Money. That's all I was to him now, a transaction, a problem to be settled and forgotten. I wanted to scream at him, to demand answers, but I couldn't find my voice. Instead, I just nodded, too numb to process anything. The divorce was finalized in less than 2 months. Nathan paid me $250,000, a small fraction of his $50 million empire. That's what my marriage had been worth to him. Nathan's company, Collins Tech Solutions, was valued at $42 million. His luxury penthouse in downtown Chicago? $8 million. And me? I walked away with just enough to disappear. The press barely noticed. A small mention in a business magazine, a quiet headline in an online gossip site. Nathan Collins divorces wife, engaged to fashion executive Isabella Bennett. The perfect power couple. I stopped checking social media after that. I couldn't bear to see the pictures. Isabella draped over Nathan at fancy galas, flashing diamond rings, sipping champagne in places we had once talked about visiting together. My former life, now hers. I didn't speak to my parents either. I didn't have to. I knew where their loyalty would be. "She's successful, Sophia," my mother had once said, the night before my wedding. "You should learn to be more like her." I had always been the disappointment. The quiet one. The shadow. And now I was nothing. I spent the next few months barely existing. I went through the motions. Wake up, go to work, come home, repeat. My once thriving journalism career felt pointless. I couldn't focus. I couldn't write. Everywhere I turned, there was Isabella's face on a magazine cover. Nathan's name in the news. It wasn't until I ran into an old friend that things started to change. "Jesus, Sophia," Maggie, my former college roommate, said when she saw me at a cafe. "You look like a ghost." I shrugged, forcing a half-hearted smile. "I feel like one." Maggie was the kind of person who didn't take excuses. She sat me down, ordered me a coffee, and forced me to talk. And for the first time, I let it out. The pain, the betrayal, the humiliation. By the time I finished, my hands were shaking, my coffee untouched. Maggie leaned forward, eyes burning with anger. "And you just let them win?" Her words hit me harder than I expected. Win? That's what Isabella wanted, wasn't it? She didn't just want Nathan. She wanted to see me broken. And I had let her. That night, for the first time in months, I didn't cry myself to sleep. Instead, I felt something else rising inside me. Something I hadn't felt in years. Determination. I had lost everything. But I wasn't going to stay down. Not anymore. The next morning, I woke up before the alarm rang. A first in months. I stared at the ceiling for a long time before swinging my legs out of bed and standing up. It was time. Time to rebuild. The first step? Taking back control of my life. I walked into my office, where my laptop sat untouched, covered in dust. Opening it, I stared at the blank screen before typing the first few words of my new story. I had always been good at uncovering secrets, at telling stories that mattered. Now, I had one hell of a story to tell. I started small, just observing. I dug into Isabella's business dealings, searched for any weaknesses in Nathan's company. I wasn't sure what I was looking for yet, but I knew where there's power, there's corruption. It was only a matter of time before I found something useful. A few weeks later, while scrolling through an anonymous business forum, I stumbled upon a rumor, a whisper about Collins Tech Solutions being in trouble. Publicly, Nathan's company was thriving. But behind the scenes, there were cracks forming. And I was going to find them. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But what they don't tell you is that it takes time. It takes patience, planning, and a level of control I never knew I had. For weeks, I had buried myself in research, combing through Collins Tech Solutions financial records, news reports, and anonymous industry forums. What I found was just the beginning of something much bigger. Nathan's company was not as stable as it seemed. Publicly, Collins Tech Solutions was valued at $42 million, a rapidly growing tech empire. But behind the scenes, it was crumbling. The first clue came from a leaked internal document, buried deep in a tech forum. A whistleblower, anonymous, of course, claimed that the company had been making risky investments, gambling with millions in shady deals. At first, I thought it was just business as usual, rich men playing dangerous games. But then I dug deeper. Nathan had been moving large sums of money to offshore accounts, hiding assets just in case things went south. His empire wasn't just struggling, it was built on lies. And Isabella? She had no idea. I couldn't help but laugh at the irony. My sister, the queen of manipulation, had married a man who was just as deceptive as she was. But this wasn't enough. I needed proof. That's when I reached out to James Anderson. James was a private investigator, known for his ability to dig up dirt on the wealthy and powerful. I had read about him in an exposé I had written years ago. Back then, I never thought I'd need someone like him.
But now?
I needed the best. I met him in a quiet bar on the outskirts of Chicago, far from any place Isabella or Nathan would frequent. He was in his 40s, sharp-eyed, and ex-military, the kind of man who didn't waste time on small talk. "What exactly are you looking for?" he asked, his voice steady. I hesitated. I could have just told him that I wanted dirt on Isabella, something to ruin her reputation, to make her feel the same humiliation she had made me feel.
But this was bigger than that.
I wanted justice. "I need to know everything," I said. About Nathan. About Isabella. Their finances, their business dealings. Anything that can bring them down. James studied me for a moment, then nodded. "I'll see what I can find." A few days later, he delivered. When James handed me the file, my hands trembled. I had expected fraud, maybe tax evasion, or even an illicit affair or two. But what he found? It was so much worse. Isabella had been embezzling money from her own company for over a year. Millions of dollars had been funneled into her personal accounts, disguised as business expenses. Nathan, meanwhile, had been laundering money through shell companies, fake businesses created to hide illegal transactions. They were both criminals in different ways. And now I held the evidence. I didn't want to go public just yet. That would be too easy. Too quick. No, I wanted to watch them fall apart from the inside. I started with Isabella. A simple anonymous tip to the board of directors at her company. Within a week, the company launched an internal investigation. The next step? Nathan. Using a fake email account, I sent the financial documents James had found to one of Nathan's biggest investors, a man known for having zero tolerance for dishonesty. Within days, whispers of fraud began to spread through the business world. Nathan's empire was about to collapse, and he didn't even see it coming. A few weeks later, the first headline hit the news. Fashion executive Isabella Collins under investigation for financial fraud. I sat in my apartment, watching it unfold on TV, my hands wrapped around a cup of tea. The camera zoomed in on Isabella, stepping out of her luxury car, surrounded by reporters. She looked shaken, but she still had that arrogant tilt to her chin, like she thought she could talk her way out of this. But the world wasn't listening. Not this time. I smiled. But the best part? It wasn't over yet. 2 days after Isabella's scandal broke, Nathan's company was hit with a federal investigation.
Fraud.
Money laundering. Financial corruption on a massive scale. Investors pulled out overnight. Stock prices plummeted. And Nathan? For the first time since our divorce, he called me. I stared at his name flashing on my phone, my heart pounding. I could have ignored it. I should have. But I answered. "Hello, Nathan." A long silence. Then his voice, shaky, unsure. "Sophia, did you?" He stopped. Swallowed. "Did you do this?" I almost laughed. He had no idea who he had underestimated. "You did this to yourself, Nathan," I said, my voice calm. "I just helped the world see the truth." Another pause. Then a sharp inhale. "Sophia, please, you don't understand." I can fix this. Fix this? I clenched my jaw. You mean the way you fixed our marriage? Silence. I let the moment stretch before speaking again, my voice quiet but firm. Goodbye, Nathan. And then I hung up. It didn't take long for Isabella to come crawling back. She showed up at my apartment one night, her perfect facade cracked for the first time in years. Her makeup was smudged, her expensive coat wrinkled, and her desperation was unmistakable. Sophia, she said, breathless, her voice breaking. I need your help. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. My helps? I echoed, pretending to think. You mean the way you helped me when you stole my husband? Her lips trembled, but she didn't deny it. I made a mistake, she admitted. I raised an eyebrow. Which one? The fraud? The embezzlement? Or the part where you tried to ruin my life? A single tear slipped down her cheek. I have nothing left, she whispered. And for the first time in my life, I saw Isabella for who she truly was. Not the golden child. Not the perfect twin. Just a broken, desperate woman who had finally lost. I could have let her in. I could have forgiven her. But some betrayals are too deep. I smiled, just like she had that night when she took Nathan away from me. Good, I said simply. And then I closed the door in her face. I never thought revenge would taste this sweet. But standing here now, watching everything Isabella and Nathan built crumble to dust, I finally felt it, the satisfaction of knowing that they would never rise again. The news of Nathan's financial crimes spread like wildfire. His investors abandoned him, his company's stock plummeted, and soon, the federal investigation turned into an official indictment. Nathan Collins, once hailed as one of the most promising tech entrepreneurs, was now a disgraced businessman facing fraud charges that could send him to prison. The man who had so easily discarded me, who had replaced me like I was nothing, was now the one being discarded by the world. I watched his downfall from a distance, never once feeling the need to reach out. I had given him the chance to do right by me, and he had chosen betrayal. Now he had no one left to save him. Isabella, however, was a different kind of beast. She wasn't the type to go down without a fight. Even as the fraud allegations mounted, even as she lost her company and her carefully curated reputation, she still clung to her arrogance. She tried to spin the media narrative, painting herself as a victim of misinformation. But the truth was undeniable, and soon, she was left with nothing. Her high-powered friends disappeared, her lavish lifestyle collapsed, and the woman who had spent her life stepping on others to get ahead now found herself completely alone. She tried calling me again. I didn't answer. A few weeks later, I got a letter from Nathan's lawyer. At first, I considered tossing it in the trash, assuming it was some desperate attempt to make a deal. But curiosity got the better of me. When I opened it, I found something I never expected: Nathan's will. I read through the papers, my hands trembling. Nathan had left everything to me. The business, the properties, the remaining assets. All of it. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. Why would a man who betrayed me, who destroyed my life, suddenly decide to hand me everything he had left? Then, I saw the letter attached. Sophia, I know you'll probably never forgive me, and I don't blame you. I don't deserve it. I made the worst mistake of my life when I walked away from you. I thought I was choosing something better, something more exciting. But Isabella never loved me. She loved my wealth, my power, my name. And I was too blind to see it until it was too late. By the time I realized what I had done, there was no way back. You had already moved on, and I knew I had lost you forever. But I can't leave this world knowing that she wins. She took everything from you once. I won't let her take anything more. I've left everything to you. The business, the money, the house. It should have always been yours. Maybe this is my last attempt to make things right, or maybe it's just my way of ensuring that Isabella gets exactly what she deserves: nothing. I hope you use this to build a future that's truly yours. A future where no one overshadows you, where no one controls your worth. You were always stronger than you knew, Sophia.
I see that now.
I'm sorry it took losing you to realize it. Nathan. I read the letter twice, feeling a storm of emotions I wasn't ready for. Anger, sadness, and something that almost felt like pity. He had destroyed me, but in the end, he had destroyed himself too. And now, he was gone, leaving behind nothing but regret. I didn't cry. I didn't grieve for him. He had made his choices, and he had to live with them until he couldn't anymore. I took the estate, but I had no interest in keeping Nathan's business. I sold the company, liquidated the assets, and took what was left to start fresh. I found a new apartment, one that was mine and mine alone, free from the ghosts of my past. I poured myself into my writing again, not just as a journalist, but as an author. I had a story to tell now, one that I knew would matter. One evening, as I was packing up my old things, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, I wasn't surprised to see Isabella standing there, looking disheveled and lost. She was a shadow of the woman she once was, her designer clothes wrinkled, her makeup smudged, her desperation barely hidden. "You took everything from me," she whispered. I tilted my head, studying her. "Did I? Or did you do that to yourself?" She swallowed, her throat tightening. "I have nowhere to go, Sophia. No one to turn to." For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then I remembered the way she had smiled when she took Nathan from me. The way she had told me I belonged in her shadow. The way she had reveled in my pain. I took a deep breath and stepped aside. "That's not my problem." She stared at me, expecting me to cave, expecting me to be the same sister who had always let her win. But I wasn't that person anymore. I had finally learned my worth. I shut the door in her face, locking her out of my life for good. Standing there, in the silence of my new beginning, I realized something. I had spent my whole life being the quiet one, the forgotten twin, the girl in the shadows. Not anymore. This was my story now. And for the first time, I was the one writing the ending.